Cantor Audio, a division of Recorded Books, presents The Mystery of the Polite Man by C.M. Rawlins, narrated by Sasha Higgins. Chapter 1. Every time Lady Darrowby Jones turned the corner from the herb garden to view the front of the house she had married into, she was struck with how handsome her home was. Dating from the reign of Queen Anne, it had both symmetry and ramshackleness, classical proportions and eccentric additions demonstrating the peculiar personalities of a long line of Darrowby predecessors. The front facade faced south, and the August morning sun put crazy patterns of light and shade across the pale yellow stonework, making a patchwork or a chessboard of her home. She stopped a moment to take in the familiar view. A bee buzzed to her left. No, not a bee, but the whine of Fingal's taxi as it made off down the drive. Somebody had arrived, or somebody had left. The gravel crunched under her sturdy shoes as she made her way towards a figure standing on the steps outside the front door. The door they barely ever used, but it stuck so terribly. "Darrowby," she said when in earshot and saw her husband perched in the doorway. No answer at all, nor on the repeat vocalization. "Darrowby, dear, what on earth is happening?" She reached the bottom of the steps and looked up fondly at her husband, a man losing several fights. The first was with his weight, easily tackled by letting out his trousers, sadly a regular event now. The second was with his head of hair, or rather lack of it. Several retreating blonde tufty splodges like a badly mown lawn. The final losing position was with fashion. His choice of suit was from the turn of the century. Lord Darrowby hadn't spent a guinea on his clothes since he'd inherited his uncle's wardrobe, a quarter of a century earlier. He argued there was little point with so many handsome suits to choose from. Lady Darrowby Jones remembered the outfit he had selected for their wedding day, a Victorian dress coat with a mismatching pair of breeches that ended at the knee, and a regular stovepipe of a hat. As for the shoes, suffice it to say that his uncle's nickname had been Big Banana Feet. "Oh dear, oh dear," Lord Darrowby Jones muttered, whether to his wife of 21 years or to himself she couldn't say. "Why, oh dear, dear? She's gone, dear, gone." Well, that solved two things. He was undeniably talking to his wife, although not looking her way, rather staring forlornly down the drive towards the gates half a mile distant, where a motor car now moved silently across the field of view, its hum lost to the steadily increasing distance. And it was someone departing, not arriving. Now Lady Darrowby Jones had only to determine the object Darrowby referred to. She remembered Fingal's taxi, his motor revving unnecessarily over the gravel. Didn't that mad Irishman know that the more you pushed your foot down on gravel, the slower you moved across it? Something to do with someone's law of motion on driveways? Or did that particular magazine article cover tactics at golf? She resolved not to travel first class on the trains anymore. They had such giddy magazines, full of useless claptrap, available in the first-class waiting room. "Dear, who exactly has gone?" She raised her voice, feeling not quite the lady she'd become since marrying Lord Darrowby Jones. "Why, Miss Fire, of course." "Miss Fire?" She felt she should know anyone with such a distinctive name. She briefly imagined Miss Fire attending the symposium in revealing costume to entertain the gentlemen. Then it came to her. "Oh dear, you mean Miss Fryer?" "That's what I said, dear." It took another dozen dears to get the facts established, 6 from Lady Darrowby Jones and half a dozen from her husband. Miss Fryer was the latest in a long line of secretaries to Lord D.J., The last 8 had left because of the onerous work conditions at Darrowby Hall. Now it seemed Miss Fryer was the 9th, although Lady Darrowby Jones didn't want to jump to conclusions. "Why did she leave, dear?" she asked her husband, taking the 12 steps 3 at a time to stand next to him. He mumbled his reply, invoking a "Don't mumble, Darrowby" response, but softened by taking his big hairy hand in her chubby little one. "She said she wasn't going to cut up slugs. She waved this paper in my face and said it was her job description, and it said nothing about slugs." How can that be, dear? He drew his wife to him, thinking how much chubbier she was than the waif-like creature he'd stood at the altar with. He liked chubby, so he pulled her towards himself, knocking against the Darrowby duck on its plinth in the process. Darrowby duck rocked slightly, looking as if it would totter and fall, likely smashing against the granite steps. But Lady Darrowby Jones's rather ample bottom moved in, steadying the stone duck, while attempting to steady her husband's shattered nerves. "It's all right, Darrowby dear. We'll simply find another one. Don't worry, it will work out." These words were meant for reassurance, but failed miserably. Lord Darrowby Jones took a step back, producing more pressure on Darrowby duck, but Lady Darrowby Jones's bottom was firmly in place now, and wailed his next words. "How will I ever be ready for the symposium, Jonesy? Everything I've worked for." As the problems had elevated themselves, Lord Darrowby Jones had moved on from the dear stage, on to his interpretation of half of the surname she'd brought with her, on that happy occasion 21 years ago, come September the 12th. It had been a condition her father had set on approving her move into the aristocracy, and before the rather impressive dowry had changed hands, Evan Jones, her dearly departed father, had sought a permanent link with the next best thing to royalty, securing the Jones name amongst the aristocracy in one simple move. One contract drawn up, and a pot of money moving from one healthy bank account to a rather overdrawn one. Surprisingly, for such a mercantile start to a marriage, it had been an excellent one. Politeness had developed into fondness, and fondness had steadily progressed to a form of love. At least, that is how a marriage guidance counsellor would see it. Not that they had ever needed to seek advice on their marriage. "Never fear, dear. I will this very day locate a new secretary for you. See if I don't." "You will, dearest, dear." "I will. I shall go this very morning to Oxford to procure the best there is." She was well aware of her weakness for impulsive offerings, but surely she would find someone in that heaving mass of spires and churches. Besides, she made a sudden determination to order her husband a new suit for the Limicology Symposium coming up in October, and there was no better place for suit procurement than the rather proper Salisbury grist and partridge. She looked at the watch, pinned upside down to her jacket, sister in hospital style, although Lady Darrowby Jones had never worked a day in her life. She could just catch the 11:43 if she got her skates on. There was time for a quick cuddle first. She would telephone the station and ask the station master at Darrowby Holt to keep the train a minute or two. The man owed her a favour after locating his missing daughter just last year, tracing her all the way to the travelling circus and snatching her back from the clutches of a wicked clown who, it turns out, the police were rather interested in. No doubt the man was raising the prison roof right now with his comic antics and slapdash act. She rather liked her cuddles. "I'll go now," she said between the kisses she had to stand on tiptoe to achieve. "Catch the morning train. Oxford. Secretary. Telephone. Tell Smith." Just then, they heard the swishing sound of someone swiping at undergrowth. They knew the sound and what produced it. They made to detach themselves before Lady Alice, the only offspring from their union, turned the house corner on her march to or from the stables. "Got you, evil weed!" she shouted in triumph. "Morning, dear," Lady Darrowby Jones called across the rising heat of the day. "Got you good and proper." "Going riding?" A silly question because she was dressed for riding with shiny long boots polished by Sam, the groom who worshipped Lady Alice, together with jodhpurs, jacket and tie and riding hat. Lady Alice, Ally to her friends, who numbered rather few, not that she cared, walked directly past her parents standing together at the top of the steps, not seeing them at all. It wasn't even a case of out of sight, out of mind, Lady Darrowby Jones considered. They were plainly visible, yet totally invisible to their 19-year-old daughter. "Good morning, milady. Station is it today?" Smith seemed out of a bygone era, dressed smartly in his chauffeur's uniform, holding the door to their 1910 Silver Ghost, and smiling inanely as he greeted his employer. "Yes, Smith," she replied, then added on impulse, "Tell me, Smith, how long have you been with us?" "That depends, milady." "Depends on what? What year is it now, milady?" "Why, it's 1924, of course." She watched him count with his fingers a long while, drumming them against his trousers. Then he gave up on the calculation. "I was a nipper when I started here, milady. Must have been 1863 or thereabouts." It was now Lady Darrowby Jones's turn to exercise her mind with simple arithmetic. She did so as the car made its gradual passage down the drive. No hurry, for the morning train would wait. "That's 79 years you've been a resident here at Darrowby. 3 times longer than me," she eventually pronounced through the speaking tube. "No, that can't be right. 58 years, Smith." 58 and counting, milady." Smith slammed the brakes on, throwing Lady Darrowby Jones forwards from her seat. "Sorry, milady, there was a cat." "What type of cat?" she asked before she could stop herself. "A black one, milady. Did you see it, milady? If you didn't, then it don't count as bad luck, milady. That's a rule we always said, milady." "What black cat, Smith? You must be imagining it." Only she had seen a fleeting black object, darting from left to right across the single-track road. "Here's the train, ready and waiting for you, milady." Chapter 2. Lady Darrowby Jones settled in her first-class seat and set about watching her fellow passengers, her favourite pastime. Often there were few to observe, but today seemed busier than usual. Perhaps the university was playing cricket against Cambridge. No, that made no sense, as term didn't start until October, and then it would be rugger at weekends and on Wednesday afternoons. It must be something else going on. She felt sure the other 5 people she shared her carriage with would give her clues aplenty. It was just a matter of studying them carefully. There was a vicar in the corner, every bit as plump as Darrowby, such that his dog collar seemed to be slowly strangling him. The mystery of the strangled vicar. Another man, sitting opposite him, seemed pompous enough to be a professor. What would be this professor's particular area of expertise? History? Linguistics? Philosophy? She was sure she was getting closer. The fact that it was religious studies clicked suddenly, and it all made sense. She had chosen to go to Oxford on the very day of the Brotherhood of Jesus annual meeting, shortened to BOJAM. The other passengers fitted the mould now. A spinster by the door, who dedicated her lonely, loveless life to the local parish, trying to fill it with flowers and cleaning rotas, fetes and jumble cells. The life, not the church, although both would fit the bill. The middle-aged man in the corner would be a civil servant, either attending BOJAM in a governmental capacity or as a private individual. Who could tell? Perhaps he had volunteered, wanting to attend, and his colleagues were only too happy to let him go. That left the young man, barely an adult, smartly dressed in quality clothes, yet looking nervous, especially when there was movement in the corridor outside. He was a third-class passenger in first-class space. There was a time when Lady Darrowby Jones would have contested such cheek, demanding to see the impostor's ticket before shunting him back to third class. But not now. Life was too short, and she rather liked the impetuousness of his action. Besides, he was rather good-looking, if a touch on the youthful side. Oxford was heaving with men of the cloth, such that she was forced to use her loudest voice for a table at Reginald's, in her opinion the best restaurant in the west of England. Reginald, the Cockney chef and owner, always wanted to see her. She suspected it was a ploy he utilised on all female diners, but she enjoyed it all the same, much as she enjoyed the trout with half a bottle of Sancerre. 2 tasks this afternoon, she said to herself, there being no one else as she sipped coffee and deliberated over the flat mint chocolate that came with it. First to get a suit for Darrowby, then the matter of finding a secretary. "I'm sorry, milady." "Nothing of consequence, dear," she replied to the waiter, while signing the chit he had brought over. She supposed Torino, the delightful Italian butler, paid the account from time to time, Or maybe it fell into the remit of Mrs. Corner, the mouse-like housekeeper who looked as if she wanted to hide away in a corner and never come out. Yet Mrs. Corner had the respect of all the staff, despite her seemingly timid personality. Perhaps the respect came because of her personality. Lady Darrowby-Jones loved to think about her little team. Actually, not so little. Total staff head count was somewhere north of 40. Suits meant a visit to Salinsby, Grist and Partridge, without doubt the finest gentlemen's outfitters outside London. She checked her handbag for Darrowby's measurements and stood for the short walk up the High to the door of Salinsby, Grist and Partridge, looking forward to a fun afternoon feeling fabric and admiring the cut of gentlemen's jackets and trousers. Lady Darrowby-Jones was in for a rather rude surprise on entering this ancient shop, still run by a Mr. Grist and a Mr. Partridge, but the fifth and sixth generation respectively from the founders. Rumour was that Mr. Salinsby had turned to drink and lost his share of the business in a card game. The doorman held the door open for her, and she thanked him, remembering her manners as always, before walking straight into a wall. Actually, it wasn't a wall at all, unless walls were made of wool tweed these days. The impact rocked Lady Darrowby-Jones, much the same as the Darrowby duck had wobbled on its plinth. She felt her legs buckle, then the floor rise to meet her. "I'm so sorry, Mrs. Eyre." "Mrs. Eyre?" she managed to repeat from her floor position, looking up at a brown-clad figure above her. "Lady, you mean?" "Lady Eyre," the young gentleman said. "I'm so sorry. Can I help you up? I wasn't looking where I was going. Why are you laughing, lady?" Lady Darrowby-Jones was suitably hoisted back to vertical, and her feet planted on the shop floor of polished stone in black and white check. "I knew you from somewhere," she said, checking her ankles by shuffling her feet in a little dance. "The train," he replied. "Of course, Mr. Third Class. Was it that obvious?" It was, and she informed him as much. The problem was looking guilty. It reminded her of a play she'd gone to see in the Oxford Playhouse just a year or two back. It had been the first play in a brand new theatre, something to do with guilt being worn on the sleeve. She had actually preferred to watch the interesting characters in the audience, determining their background and speculating as to their circumstances. "To play the part, you've got to look the part," she said, remembering a line from the play. "You've got the clothes, dear, but not the look." Now that she had said it, it all made sense. This man was an impostor of some description, yet there was nothing flighty about him, nothing giddy at all. "Are you employed, young man?" "I am. No, I was. I've just been fired." "Come with me to help me buy my husband a new suit. Whatever your background, you've at least got some taste in clothes. My name is Lady Darrowby-Jones, by the way." "I can't, Lady Darrowby-Jones, I'm sorry to say. This is the establishment I've been fired from. They don't want me in here any longer, not even long enough to let me change out of their clothes." Ah, that explained the first-class clothes on a third-class man. The cheeky blighter had helped himself to the stock, no doubt. Should she call the police? "Will you meet me later once my purchase is complete here?" Why did she ask that? "Meet me for tea in 1 hour. We can go anywhere you like." 94 minutes later, the deal was done. Lord Darrowby-Jones had a new suit being made, promised for delivery before the symposium started. Lord Darrowby-Jones also had a new prospective secretary in a young man, impeccably dressed, called Alfie Burrows. "I couldn't resist the suits, Lady Darrowby-Jones," he told her over a cup of tea and scones in a Lyons coffee shop. "At first, I just tried them on in the changing rooms when no one was looking. Then, I just had to wear them out in the world, so I smuggled a few out. You see, I've been first an apprentice and then a clerk of the counter since I was 14. I know that shop inside out, Lady Darrowby-Jones. It was easy to get suits my size out without being detected until what, dear? Until the inevitable happened, Lady Darrowby-Jones. I was spotted by my floor manager out in the park on Sunday. He never liked me much because I was on the rise, and he'd spent a few decades getting the single promotion. But you were on the train this morning. Why weren't you here at work? Did she suspect something with this fascinating young man? Maybe he was spinning her a yarn to extract a 10-bob note from her. No, somehow he didn't look the sort. He had honestly plastered all over his expensive tweed suit. I came in late today because we're staying open into the evening. Something to do with all those vicars around the place. You see, we're doing a deal on sober suits for the clergy. You can have any colour as long as it's grey, that sort of thing. So instead of getting changed quietly in the cloakroom, you were stopped at the entrance and bundled off like a criminal to see the store manager? Exactly, Lady Darrowby Jones. Mr. Ford wouldn't even let me change out of their clothes into my own. He just wanted me gone. So now you're looking for employment? I suppose I am. A wave of guilt washed over him as he thought about his 13 siblings and single mother at home. His father, long gone, probably collecting dustbins in heaven now. He felt sure there would be a need for dustbin men up in the life ever after. Well, it could just be your lucky day, young man. Why was she saying this? Could she really be serious about offering employment to a self-confessed thief who really should be in jail? It seems she was, for Lady Darrowby Jones launched into a job description, despite not having the foggiest idea what a secretary in a private home really did. Chapter 3. Lord Darrowby Jones looked as if he hadn't moved all day, rooted still on the front steps, looking over the half-mile drive that wound towards the lodge house and the outside world. On closer inspection, Lady Darrowby Jones saw that his bottom shared the plinth with Darrowby Duck, shoved over against the large porch wall to make room for an ample posterior. Dear, allow me to introduce Mr. Alfred Burrows, Secretary Extraordinaire. Lady Darrowby Jones turned to Elfie and explained that the large man sharing a stone seat with a stone duck was his employer. What do you know about slugs, my boy? Nasty, slippery things, my lord. What? Lord Darrowby Jones stood, sending Darrowby Duck into further precarious wobbles. I think the boy said what nice, elasticy things they are, dear. Yes, quite. They do expand. I suppose you could say much as elastic does. Come, Burrows, I'll show you the rope so we can... Darrowby, where are your manners? The supper gong's going to go any minute now, and I haven't had a drop of gin all day. Far too busy in Oxford to dally, you see, despite that delightful-looking new cocktail bar near the station. You can show Mr. Burrows everything in the morning. Mrs. Corner can take him to his bedroom, while I do something for this terrible thirst that's come upon me. Do you know, I believe someone once told me it was the lack of gin that caused the Roman Empire to fall. Mrs. Corner? Ah, there you are. Be so kind as to take Lord Darrowby Jones's new secretary to the... I think the Blue Room, don't you? Darrowby Hall had existed for over 300 years, surviving completely unscathed through civil war and countless rebellions. Lady Darrowby Jones's explanation was it was too out in the sticks to warrant attention. Hence, it couldn't boast that Oliver Cromwell had stayed there, sleeping in the Lord Protector's bedroom, or that Prince Albert used to stay in the consort suite. With no claims to fame to mark the house's passage through history, the bedrooms were named after colours. There was even a black and white room on the second floor. Years earlier, Lady Alice had determined to sleep in every bedroom in the house, starting with the black and white room. She completed the whole of the second floor and was making ready to move down the grand staircase to the first floor when there was a mini-staff rebellion and she was told to cease and desist by a strained Mrs. Corner. Mrs. Corner was always a bit strained, at least on the edges of her thin, angular face. Lady Darrowby Jones assumed it came with the territory, shuddering to think what it was like to earn a living. Entering the house, she crossed the hall to the library, calling loudly for gin before her body collapsed in a heap, and they had to persuade the coroner there was no malicious intent in denying her the tipple she deserved. Lady Darrowby Jones settled back in an armchair, wondering where her first pink gin had got to, and gratefully accepting Torino's offer of another in a fresh glass. As it usually did at this time of day, her mind wandered back over recent events, particularly to the strange conversation she had had with Alfie Burrows, alone in their first-class carriage. It seemed Mr. Alfred was anything but a gentleman. At least he had exhibited the honesty not to pretend to her he was anything else but a man trying to better himself. He was doing it in a rather open way, which she admired, rather than bluffing that he was a branch of the Burrows of Burrow Hall in Devonshire. She liked that honesty, but a rubbish collector's son. "I have a predicament, Lady Darrowby Jones," he had said when she had started her routine questioning of the suspect. No, scratch that. He wasn't a suspect at all, rather a candidate, although even that wasn't strictly true, as she had already offered him the position. "Why is that, Alfred?" "My father's dead. He died in an accident." That wasn't the whole of it, Lady Darrowby Jones could tell. He knew it as well, for he had continued, "My mother, God bless her soul, manages on my salary with a dozen little ones to look after. Did I mention, Lady Darrowby Jones, that I'm the oldest of 13? "Lucky for some," she had replied, before asking how his father had died. "It was an accident." There was a reluctance to tell, and she sensed it immediately, so she pushed for more. "It was an accident at work," he finally spilled. "He used to be assigned to collect rubbish from the factories on the edge of town. He was in the yard one day, swinging a giant bin onto the rubbish pile, only the other bloke let it go at the wrong moment." "What happened?" "Well, it tipped all over him, Lady Darrowby Jones. He suffocated while knocked out, or else he got knocked out first and then suffocated. It don't matter." "It doesn't matter?" "Sorry, Lady Darrowby Jones. I meant to say it doesn't matter which. He was stone-cold dead when they found him the next morning." Lady Darrowby Jones had wanted to tell him that dead people usually were stone-cold, but something warned her off the observation. Maybe it was the way he hid the tears in his eyes by leaning forwards to polish his shoes on the back of his socks. Correction, not his shoes, but those belonging to Messrs. Salinsby, Grist and Partridge, or their rightful heirs, and the heirs of those heirs ad infinitum. Instead, she asked what salary he'd been receiving as a counter-clerk. "Because, whatever it is, Darrowby will double it." The head cook at Darrowby Hall was a fascinating creature, with whom Lady Darrowby Jones loved her fortnightly menu meetings, often dragging her out of her kitchen lair just to observe the woman a little more closely. She seemed all arms and legs, sticking out at odd angles, certainly too many for standard issue. Mrs. Stone must have been the end of the production run. Darrowby always used to say, "They were running out of body parts, so just used whatever was available." She was also a brilliant cook, witnessed in the ever-expanding waists of both Darrowby Joneses. She was brilliant generally, but every so often, without warning, she would bring up a gem. Today was obviously a gem night. Lamb cutlets from the estate, with a mint sauce anybody would happily commit murder for a second helping, with new potatoes and cabbage, lightly fried with something sweet mixed in. For pudding they had apple pie, Lady Darrowby Jones's favourite by a country mile, with a copious amount of cream that poured so smoothly from the battered silver jug that a long-forgotten Darrowby had purchased as part of a vast collection several 100 years ago. It poured so beautifully, one almost forgot that one was plastering the apple pie with a deadly instrument. Alfred, or Alfie as he had introduced himself, was appreciative of the sumptuous grub, clearly wondering whether he would eat like this every day. Mrs. Jem Stone was clearly a highly prized component part of life at Darrowby Hall. "You might wonder, Mr. Barrow." "It's Burrows, my lord." "Quite what I said. You might wonder, Mr. Burrows, why there are 4 places set and only 3 bods at the table." "I did wonder, my lord." In truth, he hadn't noticed the empty place opposite him, but felt being labelled unobservant may not be the best start to his new career. "Our daughter has a clock of her own. I've never known her to be on time for a meal, Mr. Bellow, not since she first joined us from the nursery." As if waiting in the wings for her summons on stage, Lady Alice chose that exact moment to enter the small dining room they used when it was just family. Well, family and senior staff like Alfie Burrows. Moments before confirmed as private secretary to Lord Darrowby Jones at £200 per annum, bed and board and a suit a year included. The moment Alfie saw her daughter, Lady Darrowby Jones knew he was smitten. 2 moments later, she revised that thought. He was completely, utterly, totally, absolutely in love with the cruel, arrogant creature they called their own. Poor Alfie, she sighed to herself. But at least this one will stay around as secretary for a while. Chapter 4. Lady Darrowby Jones woke early a few mornings later to 2 disturbances, one within her experience, the other new to her. Lord Darrowby Jones, snoring like a live volcano, was nothing unusual, but the noise on the lawn outside wasn't how she normally liked to be summoned from her bed. She made her way to the heavy curtains that really needed to be taken down and battered half to death to remove the dust that caught in her throat. She pulled them apart to see it was the half-light of the pending dawn. Then she saw the origin of the noise. Alfie Burrows was trying to gain entry to the house, and the laddie he placed on the rose bed to gain access to the first floor had clattered to the ground when one side gave away. She just spotted Alfie before he disappeared through the window. Why? She slipped on her robe, determined to find out, and met up with the man in question on the first floor landing. What on earth? Oh, hello, Lady Darrowby Jones. I was out for a stroll and couldn't get back in. The kitchen door was locked. Smith lets the dogs out early, she replied. He must have locked you out. But this is ridiculously early to be wandering around the grounds. Could you not sleep? As soon as she asked this question, she knew the reason why. It was painted all over his miserable face. Yes. He knew that she knew, and she was the mother of the cause of his extreme consternation. I can't get her out of my mind, Lady Darrowby Jones. In response, Lady Darrowby Jones, ever practical in these matters, led the way to the pantry off the breakfast room. We'll have a cup of tea, she said, and set about boiling a kettle and counting the teaspoons into the pot. I'm sorry that I disturbed you, he said. No matter, my boy, no matter. I'm awake now, that's what counts. Tell me how you're getting on. It's been, 2 weeks now? 12 days, Lady Darrowby Jones. The work is fine. Even cutting up slugs? Even that. Everyone has been so kind. That made Lady Darrowby Jones sit up. The inflection he put on the word everyone told her it was not the case. Except, she said, knowing the answer. Well, out with it, my boy. We're one big happy family here. And Alfie came out with it, rather a torrent, in fact, by which Lady Darrowby Jones determined that her daughter, their only offspring after 20 years of placid and pleasant marriage, was actually a rat and a devil rolled into one. The poor boy, the secretary extraordinaire, as she had touted him, was hopelessly love-struck with Lady Alice, who would barely give him the time of day. She's so aloof, he finished his well. So absolutely beautiful, but like a stone for a heart. Exactly, Lady Darrowby Jones. I would rather not speak of beauty in such terms, but... Lady Darrowby Jones realised that her protégée, plucked from the pending unemployment line in Oxford, was particularly good at starting sentences without finishing them. She decided to move the conversation on. After all, however rat-like Lady Alice was, she was flesh and blood. Then she agreed, adding one final titbit to ease the young man's troubled mind. She has just come out of a fearful bust-up, she explained, thinking of the young Lord Baritone, heir to 2 earldoms and enough property in London to enable him to sleep in a different house every night of the year. I don't quite know what happened, but there were some pretty cross words right here on the lawn just a fortnight ago, 2 days before you arrived, in fact. Oh, she sent him packing and swore never to go with a man again. Surely the fact that she was sworn off men would ease the heartache young Alfie suffered from. Now, tell me about the grounds and their pre-dawn existence. I don't recall ever inspecting them at that unearthly hour. She didn't add that she had spotted Baritone in Darrowby Village just a few days ago. Nothing would be gained by creating rivalry for the heart of Lady Alice. She drained her tea, made to stand up, then sat down abruptly at Alfie's next words. I heard loud noises again. They seemed to be coming from that half-derelict house on the grounds. You mean the Dowager House? 2 tall chimney stacks? That's the one, Lady Darrowby Jones. No one has lived there since my mother-in-law died 17 years ago, and it was crumbling then. It's traditionally where the mother moves to when the father dies and the earldom moves to the son. Then it hit her that he had said, I heard loud noises again. You've heard these noises before? He had, explaining that he wandered around the extensive park most nights, unable to sleep for thinking about Lady Alice. What are they like? He described them as removals, yet asked why anyone would want to move furniture or other heavy stuff in the dead of the night. The funny thing is, I hear it one night at the Dowager House. The next night it's moved to the East Wing. Very peculiar. The Dowager House has a high wall around it, and the gate is boxed in with wood so I could see nothing. The East Wing is going the same way as the Dowager House, I'm afraid, Lady Darrowby Jones replied, her mind working on double time. It's shut up because we don't need a ballroom and the like anymore. Why would anyone move furniture in disused rooms? It made no sense, but Lady Darrowby Jones would dig out an explanation. She felt a mystery coming on. Her pulse quickened as she went to get dressed. Later that morning, Lady Darrowby Jones found herself in the perfect position to follow up on the little mystery she had going, although her timing was off, so she missed out on the next enthralling chapter of her promised adventure. Matthew Carter, the home-from-the-war hero who never spoke a word while going about his gardening duties, came up to her while she was picking some roses for the Red Room, as a guest was coming to stay. Someone to do with planning for the Limicology Symposium. He tugged her arm and beckoned with the other arm. Sign language she half followed, enough to know that she was supposed to follow him. He pointed in the direction of the Dowager House, whose 2 tall chimneys could be seen poking above the trees. Her blood raced. She knew it would have something to do with the mystery, feeling it in her bones. However, at that very moment, her maid called from the terrace that the guest had arrived. In the distance she saw Alfie bent double over a slug colony, or whatever they were called by the experts in these matters. I say, Alfie, come here. Matthew is wanting me to see something, but I've got visitors arriving. Be a dear and see what he wants, while I act hostess for a while. Do you 2 not know each other? Well, Matthew, meet Alfie. Alfie, meet Matthew. Lady Darrowby Jones made to return to the house and her duty. Then she turned back to see Alfie and Matthew Carter in animated sign language. You speak sign language? She asked, realising the ridiculousness of that question. You don't speak with sign language. Yes, I do, on account of the twins, Lady Darrowby Jones. The twins? Oh, you mean your brothers and sisters? 2 are deaf, are they? Yes, Lady Darrowby Jones, both from birth. We all know sign language at home. Milady, came the voice from the terrace. Sir John Plumer is most keen to make your acquaintance. If you could just come indoors, milady. Yes. Well, she turned back to Alfie. What is the dear man saying? It's all about the Dowager House, Lady Darrowby Jones. Something to do with noises at night. You mean? Lady Darrowby Jones's turn now to start sentences without finishing them. Yes, Lady Darrowby Jones. He's referring to the noises I heard last night. It's called collaboration of your account, Alfie. That's what the policeman would say. How fascinating, yet how frustrating to be pulled away at this very moment. Lady Darrowby Jones clearly did not want to go back to the terrace to meet Professor Sir John Plumer. Some said he was the leading authority in the world on slugs, with a particular bent on their behaviour in stressed circumstances. What about the stress she, Lady Darrowby Jones, felt at being pulled away just as her mystery was unfolding? Report back to me the moment you hear more, Alfie Burrows, won't you now? Of course, Lady Darrowby Jones, although I'll be tied up all evening with the Professor. Lord Darrowby Jones has said to expect a long session tonight. I'll be taking minutes, you see. Well, send Matthew to investigate, and then you can interpret what he says back to me later. Let's meet later on as soon as we can. She turned back for the house. Her maid, Lily, looked relieved that she was finally turning her way. Behind Lily, Lady Darrowby Jones could just make out a small figure bouncing up and down. That would be Professor Sir John Plummer, or whatever the wretched creature called himself. To take her away, just as her mystery was developing, was a crime she would never forgive him for. Chapter 5. Professor Sir John Plumer might as well have been the plumber for all the attention Lady Darrowby Jones was able to give him that evening. He tried valiantly. In the scheme of things, he wasn't a bad sort at all. Perhaps a little too serious, with a dash of pomposity, just like the bitters in a glass of gin. He was told by Lady Darrowby Jones that he mumbled. Such was her pique at being distracted by slug business, when there was a real-life mystery going on in the grounds of her home. From the point of being informed on mumble status, he made a huge effort to speak clearly and loudly, to the point where Lady Darrowby Jones, with that delicious inconsistency that belongs to some of the female species, told the poor man that there was no need to shout. "I was saying, Lady Darrowby Jones," he repeated in what he hoped was midway between mumble and shout, "that the common garden slug is a much maligned creature. I feel it is my duty to be some form of champion for their rights." Yes, quite so. What would Matthew and Alfie have arranged? Had she left Alfie long enough out of the Professor's grip by sacrificing herself at the slug altar? Had he enough time to make the plans? Could she stand any more slug talk? One thing she appreciated about Darrowby, her husband, these last 20 years, was that he kept his passion to himself. Perhaps in more ways than one, but at least she was saved the endless slug talk that the Professor dealt in. "Tell me, Sir John, are you a married man?" "No, Lady Darrowby Jones." Did he look offended? Had she broken some unwritten cardinal rule of the sluggists? Never mention personal details when talking shop. "I'm married to my work, it seems." Well, she had heard of doctors and the like being married to their work, but never an expert in slugs. She had a sudden vision of Lady Slug in her mind, a saintly but plump creature, certainly plumper than Lady Darrowby Jones, who had married the Professor, probably feeling a little sorry for him. No, that didn't work. The man was wedded to his trade. "I do believe, Darrowby," she turned to her husband, "that it's high time I stopped pestering you with my amateur questions and allowed you two to get on with some proper discussion." She stood as she talked, giving authority to her words, acting out the departure scene once and for all. "Shall I send in Mr. Burrows, dear?" "Burrows? I don't know a Burrows." "Your new secretary, dear, the one I went to Oxford for." "Ah, Oxford," started Sir John. "They have a thoroughly interesting museum there. When last I went to Oxford, I gave a lecture there concerning—" Lady Darrowby Jones slipped away mid-sentence. She met Alfie in the hall, waiting diligently to be summoned to the library. "Ah, there you are, Alfie. Tell me." But just then a thunderous roar came from the library, followed by a string of abuse and the slamming of French windows, such that several panes popped out of their frame, hung in the air a moment before falling to the ground. "I'd better go and see what's going on," Alfie said. "I expect it's a disagreement concerning whether slugs mate for life or have a series of one-night stands." She was cynical, but then she'd been battering around the great big house with nothing much to do for a fifth of a century. And, apart from the mystery of the circus last year, there'd been no real fun either, inside the house or outdoors. Lady Darrowby Jones's frustration was set to grow for 2 reasons. First, The pre-planning meeting of the symposium went on a lot longer than she expected it to, and with considerably more disagreement than she had imagined being possible. Second, Alfie Burrows was using every inch of his personality to avoid another world war breaking out. This one not along the Somme, but in the library where everything seemed to be going so wrong. That meant she couldn't get to him to find out what he'd arranged with Matthew, the gardener. She thought about going to see him herself, but she saw little point as she couldn't understand a word of sign language. Eventually, she took herself to bed with a cup of tea and a novel about murder in far-flung places. It didn't seem real, and she put it down with a sigh, turning back in her mind to the novel developing all around her. Darrowby Hall was, as Darrowby's father had described it, a structure with no modern-day purpose other than to crumble gently and gracefully, returning inexorably to the ground where the stone came from. It didn't matter that it contained contaminating objects, wooden wainscoting from the 17th century, luxurious wallpaper by the Mall, and paintings that ranged from the beautiful to the downright ugly. And that was just the landscapes. It didn't matter because these were all in slow decline as well. The Jones money had sorted out the roof, but there was still a need to spend wheelbarrows full of £5 notes on the place. Not that either Darrowby Jones would recognise their home from this description. To both of them, the one born into it, the other married into it, it was the only place to live. Life without it would be pointless, meaningless, just a void. The Darrowby Joneses shared the yellow suite at the far end of the house, because Lord Darrowby Jones would pump himself full of sleeping pills every evening, and disliked the thought that the sun might break into his pleasant slumber. This end of the house looked west out over the lawns and sluggery to the trees, behind which the chimneys of the Dowager House poked up into the sky. Lord Darrowby Jones never came down earlier than 11 in the morning, and always to a solitary breakfast. Just an ancient groom in attendance, with Torino supervising, and Mrs. Corner nervously bustling about. Lady Darrowby Jones, on the other hand, was a light sleeper, and woke easily. After 20 years, she had become used to Darrowby's incredible snoring, building up an immunity to it, shutting it out completely. But any other sound would have her instantly alert, sitting up in bed so that the blanket slipped off her side, and left Darrowby with just a sheet between himself and the world. This happened the next morning. Lady Darrowby Jones woke with a start at the cry, more like a shriek of terror, that rolled across the lawns of Darrowby Hall at 5:05. Realising this was external to the house, and a dressing gown wouldn't suffice, she hurriedly splashed water on her face, and selected a blouse and skirt before hurrying for the side door. On the way, she met Alfie Burrows, taking the steps 3 at a time, and fairly hurtling down the stairs. No tie, no jacket, just collar flapping like tiny wings. "It's—" he cried. "It can't be. I left him, was tied up. The Professor. Matthew went, I told him to." They were out of the door, heading west at a pace, knowing it to be something at the Dowager House. Inevitably, Lady Darrowby Jones could not keep up and had to slow down, first to a rapid walk, and then slower still as she struggled with breath. "Go on," she gasped. "Find out." By the time she reached the blockaded gate of the Dowager House, she saw it wide open, with a small knot of villagers edging into the property, despite the "Danger, keep out" signs posted everywhere. "What's happened?" "It's Matthew Carter," one of the villagers said, completely forgetting her title in the excitement. "He's injured." Lady Darrowby Jones sat on a large stone that had fallen from the wall and put her head in her hands. Matthew Carter, of all people, she had sent him there, to his death, for all she knew. Chapter 6. "Well, the good news is that Plumer's gone," Darrowby said. "Dear, there's been an attack at the Dowager House, and you're worried about that silly professor?" "Well, I mean to say he was most rude yesterday. The cheek of it when I'd invited him to stay here, and this is how he repays me." Lord Darrowby Jones wouldn't be shaken from his point of view. A series of insults from a slug professor sat much higher in the scheme of things than the attempted murder of a gardener. A war hero to boot. One who had come back from the Somme and never spoken a word since. There was no medical reason the doctors could find, and some went as far as to call him a malingerer, a disgrace to the uniform, etc., etc. But Matthew Carter hadn't asked for anything. He just turned up one day and resumed his old pre-war job in the gardens of Darrowby Hall. He lived alone in the house his parents had, never got behind with the rent, and never failed to pay his bills promptly. He just seemed to live for the garden, happy to be outside in rain and snow. Now, he had been struck down by evil forces, and Lady Darrowby Jones was determined to find out who and why. She knew the when, at least broadly speaking. He had been found wandering about just outside the Dowager House, blood-stained shirt and trousers, a great gash on his head. "We must go and visit Matthew Carter in hospital," Lady Darrowby Jones said, when eventually her husband had been forced to wake and dress for the day. "I wonder where Plumer's gone." "Does it matter?" "I bet he's got the train straight to Cambridge." "Why Cambridge?" Lady Darrowby Jones hadn't heard herself ask the question. It just came out of a machine somewhere, sounding just like her. "Because of the limicology department, of course." He could have added a stupid to the end of his statement. Such was his intolerance when it came to the machinations of friend-turned-foe Plumer. "I'll go on my own," she said, huffed at his lack of interest. "Better still, I'll take young Alfie." "No, you can't take my secretary, dear. I need him desperately. We've got a whole battle to fight." "You don't take falling out with the leading limicologist in the country lightly," Lady Darrowby Jones considered, as she left a very grumpy husband in the breakfast-room and went in search of someone to accompany her to the hospital. Heading across the inner hall, she bumped straight into her daughter. "Alice, what are you doing here?" she asked, then felt stupid because A, she was in her own home, and B, she was crossing the same inner hall as Lady Alice, hence could be asked the very same question. "Going riding." Why did youngsters shorten everything to the bare minimum? Was it too much effort to talk in sentences? Lady Darrowby Jones tried to remember back to that stage of life, but it was all a blur. "No, you're not, young lady. You're coming with me." And for once, Lady Alice didn't put up a fight. Perhaps something in her mother's face told her she meant business, or perhaps it was the way she folded her arms against all and every attempt to get out of the duty to visit the sick and needy, to sow comfort when there's all around, or whatever that stuff is. Darrowby Hospital had one ward and one doctor, who felt the strain of endless duty but would never consider complaining or asking for assistance. It ran to 4 nurses who worked out a shift between them. Lady Darrowby Jones was on the Board of Governors. When younger and less experienced in the ways of Darrowby life, she had tried to construct a timetable that made sense on the basis that if you knew when you were required for duty, you knew when to turn up. It seemed the rota they had confused more than enlightened. The 4 nurses, the janitor, the janitor's assistant, and the cook and her assistant had all ganged up on the newly married Lady Darrowby Jones, claiming it was just not done in that way. Not in these parts, anyway. Lady Darrowby Jones lost that battle and vowed never to get involved in a hospital scrap again. At governor meetings, she murmured her assent, pretended to read the board papers and hurried away again, even declining the customary sherry after the meeting. She was a pink gin girl, always had been and always would. She had learned the tipple lesson at an early age. Find out what you like and stick to it. Make a fuss if all they offer is champagne and your favourite is sherry or gin, or even those new-fangled cocktails that are all the rage. She compromised in this regard, adoring the cocktails but ignoring anything that was not gin-based. For all the timetable problems at the hospital, Lady Darrowby Jones was delighted to see that 3 nurses were on duty that day. With 1 patient, that's a pretty good ratio. "Ah, Lady Darrowby Jones, how nice to see you, and Lady Alice as well. My, how the sweet girl has grown." Lady Alice was not sweet. That was one quality you couldn't lay at her door. Feisty, yes. Arrogant, yes. Lacking all compassion, yes. But sweet? Of course, the old girl had brought Lady Alice into the world. It's strange how that builds a bond. Baby and midwife might not see each other again for 10 or 15 years, yet always there's something there. Yet I don't think we're due for a visit, Lady Darby-Jones. I believe the next governors' meeting is not until Thursday fortnight. I've come to see Matthew Carter, Sister Farringdon. Of course, how silly of me. He's one of your lot, isn't he? He's not a relative, if that's what you mean, Lady Alice interjected. He's a gardener on the estate. Of course, silly me. Come this way, please. I must warn you, Lady Darby-Jones and Lady Alice, that he's not in a good way. We can't get a word out of him. That's because he was shell-shocked at the Somme. He's not spoken since. Oh, what rot. I don't hold with that shell-shocked excuse one bit. I call it idleness. And you know what they say about idle hands? Sister Farringdon, he doesn't talk because he's unable to talk. Now, lead the way. The sooner we can see the poor unfortunate, the sooner we can be away. They could tell it was Matthew Carter from the notice pinned to the end of his bed. He didn't look too much like Matthew Carter, except Alice confided in her mother on the way home that she knew it was Matthew because he had a mole on his neck in the shape of a new moon. How do you know that? He used to give me piggyback rides, before the war, that is. I would pester him until he downed tools and put me on his back. We would gallop around the shrubberies, pretending I was riding in the Grand National. They didn't recognise him because of the great big gash to the left side of his face. Covered now in a bandage, it mummified him, giving the impression of a long time ago. Lady Darby-Jones shivered suddenly, thinking of death over the ages, knowing that Matthew would soon be joining in the queue to heaven. I'm so sorry, Matthew, so sorry. No response. How could there be? Take a man who hasn't spoken for almost a decade, strike him down with an enormous instrument with jagged edges, and then expect him to respond? No way. Dear Matthew, you were so good to me. Do you remember playing on the lawns and in the shrubbery where old Moses, your boss gardener, couldn't see you larking about? Lady Alice tried. No response. I hope you're comfortable here, Matthew. The baton had gone back to Lady Darby-Jones. Not in too much pain now. I expect there's some medicine for the pain. She looked up for the sister, but there was nobody in sight. They sat themselves down, one on either side of the bed, and each one took a hand. They sat for several moments in silence, not knowing what to say. I wish we could find out who did this to you, Lady Darby-Jones said, meaning every word. Polite man. I'm Lady Darby-Jones, my dear, and this is my daughter, Lady Alice. You used to give her piggyback rides when she was a baby. Polite man. Just a minute, Mother. Yes? Well, Matthew hasn't spoken since the war. What of it? Well, he's just speaked, or spoken, I mean. My lord, so he has. She turned back to Matthew and squeezed his hand considerably. Such was her joy amidst the sorrow. You can speak, Matthew. Polite This third time came with a burst of spluttering and coughing, frightening to behold. Before they knew it, 2 nurses were in there with their bustling care. Lady Darby-Jones and her daughter retreated to the doorway of the hospital her husband's great-grandfather had built, after another invasion threat from the French, until they were ushered out by an overly patient Sister Farringdon. Will he be all right? Lady Alice asked. Time will tell, she replied, which didn't help at all. I don't think he will be, my dear, Lady Darby-Jones said to fill the awkward silence. I do believe we're going to have a murder case on our hands pretty soon. Chapter 7. The notice read simply, Matthew Carter, 1876 to 1924, gardener turned soldier and back to gardener. He had no living relatives. His only brother had died at sea during the war. Back before the Somme, they had laughed about which was better, to be a soldier or a sailor. It was an argument that ran in many families during those awful years when a whole generation were mown down. He had no living relatives, so Lady Darrowby Jones promoted herself to stepsister and made a family around him. The morning after the funeral, to which most of the village turned up, the front doorbell rang. That was the door that nobody used because it stuck so badly. That meant it wasn't a regular visitor. "Milady, a chief inspector to see you. Shall I show him in here, milady?" "No, I'll see him in the study," she replied. "Have some coffee brought in. Torino, do we know this chief inspector?" She supposed he had been brought down from Oxford to look into the death of Matthew. Poor soul. "Polite man," he had said on his deathbed. It had been a miracle that he had talked at all. But if you go to all that effort, why spout nonsense? He'd said his polite man to 2 females, herself and her daughter, neither of whom could be mistaken for the male of the species. And her daughter most certainly wouldn't be considered polite under any circumstances. It was a mystery. She liked a good mystery, and real life was so much better than cheap novels. "Polite man, that's what he said," Lady Darrowby Jones repeated to the detective chief inspector, thinking him a thoroughly rude man. For a start, he slouched. He also slurred his words. Slouching and slurring were not qualities Lady Darrowby Jones warmed to. Others might, but not her. "That's all he said, right?" No title, no deference from the chief inspector. "That's just what I said. Tell me your name again, chief inspector." "Rory Manners." Was he chewing gum like an American? No, it was probably a bit of breakfast left stuck between his teeth. Pork sausage, no doubt. Nobody from Oxfordshire would chew gum. "How many times?" He shifted in his seat, no doubt seeking to slouch his body a bit further. Should she ask him if he wouldn't prefer to lie on the sofa at the back of the room? "3, and I do believe that's the 3rd time I've told you, Mr. Manners." "Well, just checking me facts." Just checking my patience, more like, thought Lady Darrowby Jones. Those facts were checked and rechecked until Lady Darrowby Jones was completely weary from the continual questioning. Did this man just wear his victims out? "So, you say nobody saw Carter from the moment he clocked off on Tuesday last?" "That's right, Chief Inspector. Nobody has come forward following my enquiries since—" "Why don't you leave the enquiries to the police, ma'am?" Ma'am was an insult, and Lady Darrowby Jones felt it keenly. It was fine for royalty, but not for your regular aristocrat. "As I was saying before I was interrupted, nobody has come forward to say they saw Mr. Carter at any time after he finished work. He would have gone home for his supper, and then probably slipped out after dark to go to the Dowager House." "Lot of supposition there, ma'am." Lady Darrowby Jones decided to change the subject, to move on before she exploded in rage. "We haven't seen you here before, have we?" Noticed the laboured use of the royal we. Something had to get through to this dreadful little man. "I live in the next village, Parfait Manor. Normally I work in Oxford, but the chief super asked me to head up this murder investigation. I'm head of homicide in Oxford." "How many last year?" "How many what?" "Murders in Oxford." "One at the start of 1923, then there was, let me see now, a suicide last year, and now this one." "Doesn't count, not in Oxford, you see." "Yeah, but surrounding countryside." "You must be worked hard, Chief Inspector, sorting all that crime out single-handedly." "Nah, I had a team, proper team, 3 police constables, lots of sergeants and detectives. Yeah, now they asked me to come down here." "Why are you here today, Inspector?" She couldn't help but demote the man. If she was in charge of the Oxfordshire Constabulary, he wouldn't have made it past constable. "I'm here to question Burrows, of course. Is he here?" "I believe Mr. Burrows is working with my husband. Why do you want to see him, may I ask?" "You can ask, but I don't have to tell," said with a chuckle that told her he appreciated his own jokes. Time to terminate this interview before she committed a murder of her own. She rang the bell. "Ah, Mrs. Corner, be so kind as to take the inspector—" Chief Inspector. The Chief Inspector to the West Room, and then inform Mr. Burrows that there's a policeman waiting to see him. I've answered all his questions, but it seems that's not enough. Yes, milady. They had reinforcements, not that they needed them. Young Alfie went quietly, protesting his innocence but not trying to run or hide from the law. Lady Darby-Jones heard the click of handcuffs, saw the surprised expression on Alfie's face as he realised his freedom to act as he saw fit had been curtailed. One click of the cuffs and a man is helpless. Gotcha, Manners said. Now they just got to throw the book at you. How do you make out that Mr. Burrows is guilty? She asked, not believing for 1 second that they had the right man. I mean, what grounds do you have for arresting him now? I mean right now, not what you expect to get sometime in the future. He was overheard telling the victim to meet him at the gates to the Dowager House. It's clear there's a racket going on somehow. The man, Manners, was picking his nose as he spoke, as if that marked him out as a genius somehow. Did Sherlock Holmes pick his nose? Maybe Dr. Watson did so, but surely only in private. He's only just come into your employment, ain't that right? 3 weeks ago. Now the man had no rank that Lady Darby-Jones would allow him, no distinctive feature for a total slob. Stands to reason, don't it? He turns up, next day there's a bleeding murder amidst strange noises at night. Guilty as hell, I say. Transportation, that's what we need. It wasn't the next day at all. Mr. Burrows had been at pains to point out that it was 2 weeks after he started working here. Same difference. Take him away, Sergeant. He's only helping with our enquiries, Manners added, perhaps thinking he'd gone a bit too far. Wouldn't you if your wife had just walked out after 30 years suffering on the job? Then why the cuffs, Mr. Manners? Stops the blighters from thinking they can run off, don't it? Take him, Sergeant. Stop pussyfooting about and do your job. Sergeant Haddock Fisher was clearly reluctant to go against the wishes of Lady Darby-Jones. As a local boy, he knew where he stood. Yes, sir. Come along, lad. We'll go down to the police station and sort this out. Don't worry, Alfie. We'll get you out of there. Mr. Manners, where are you taking him? Local Nick, I think. Go get a lawyer if you want to waste your money. No doubt you got pots of it anyway. The next morning at breakfast, Torino brought in a note from Sergeant Fisher. It said simply that Alfred Burrows had been charged with murder. Now she had a double mystery on her hands. She had to find the true culprit and prove Alfie's innocence. And Lord Darby-Jones was back to having no secretary, with a symposium coming up fast. Chapter 8. We've established that Lady Darby-Jones was an early riser. She thought she did her best thinking in the morning, although was never that certain, on the basis that much of her life had passed without too much need for thought. At least of the complicated type, working of ideas through the various brain departments that produced reason and logic, propositions, deductions and conclusions. Until now, that is. Yes, the circus mystery last year had been something of an exercise in thinking things through, but nothing compared to what confronted her now. The problem with a mystery is that you start with nothing. Well, that's not quite true. You start with a mystery, but nothing else. In this case, the cruel murder of a war hero for no other apparent reason than the fact he had been inquisitive as to the loud noises he heard at night. Of course, the police, now led by DCI Rude Manners, as she liked to think of him, had scoured the Dowager House but found nothing out of the ordinary. Besides, they had their man in the form of one Alfred Burrows, lately of Oxford, newly arrived in Derby. The police had gone to Salisbury, Grist and Partridge within an hour of taking Alfie in for questioning. Rude Manners had delighted in telling Lady Darby-Jones what she already knew, namely that he'd been dismissed for stealing stock from his employer. Stands to reason, don't it? The DCI said when Lady Darby-Jones turned up at the police station, demanding an explanation. She wanted to correct his grammar, but held off. There was no point in inciting the enemy. He was dismissed without a reference for stealing stock. Next thing we know, he's moved in here and up to no good. He'll swing for this, no doubt about that." Lady Darrowby Jones swore that Manners was licking his lips as he talked of swinging bodies at the end of a rope. 20-odd years on the force and not yet a conviction for murder, at least not with him in charge. This was his moment. "I thought it were the moment I laid eyes on the brute." Lady Darrowby Jones disagreed, pointing out that Alfie Burrows was a gentle lad who gave all his earnings to his beloved mother to care for the upkeep of his brothers and sisters. True, he had a fascination with the aristocracy. That got a snort from rude Manners, who dealt with his own feelings through snorts at his superiors and snappy shouting at inferiors. But, in Lady Darrowby Jones's considered opinion, that fascination was no more than a bit of fantasy. "Yeah," he snorted once more. "That's what killers do, living in a bloomin' world of their own." The best that Lady Darrowby Jones could muster was a promise not to charge him early on. Elfie had to agree to be helping the police with their inquiries and staying at the police station voluntarily, because the only other option consisted of charge, magistrate, remand, in Oxford Prison, all in short order. Now Lady Darrowby Jones wandered the grounds of her estate, just like she imagined Alfie Burrows had done, although for very different reasons. Her mind was working double shifts on the mystery of the polite man, as she termed it, trying to make sense of it all. She had just got as far as a list of suspects, reluctantly including Elfie and happily excluding herself and Darrowby, on the basis that he had been soundly snoring throughout, when she turned a corner in the shrubbery and came upon a startling thing. Lord Baritone and Lady Alice were having a frightful row, quite a ding-dong, and, for once, her daughter seemed to be getting the worst of it. That wasn't so surprising when you took Baritone's distinctly unpleasant character into account. Luckily, this had become apparent before the expected betrothal, rather than after it. Just time for her daughter to escape his clutches. "Barry!" The poor chicken was almost blubbing. "You need to turn yourself in." How anyone could have christened the infant Lord Baritone as Barry was beyond her, but that's just what they did. Barry Baritone must have had hell at boarding school. Perhaps that explains some of his aggression, a knee-jerk reaction to term after term of merciless bullying. She reflected in that split second, when the brain is surprised and time seems to slow down, or the brain speeds up, one of the two, that Darrowby had had the decency to skip the school arc, instead having a series of mild-mannered tutors who were easy to get around. Her own schooling had been patchy, mainly because her father, old Jonesy, the self-made coal millionaire, hadn't believed much in the education of girls. It got worse, for Lady Alice had been sent to boarding school at the age of 11, but lasted less than a term. She refused to cooperate with anything or anyone, because they drew the line at her taking all her 7 horses to school, so she could ride a different one each day of the week. After 2 months, the headmistress had summoned Lady Darrowby Jones and explained that perhaps Sandley Abbey wasn't exactly suited to Lady Alice. Education didn't seem to feature too much in the world that the Darrowby Joneses lived in, but Barry Baritone was a clever one, with a university degree. "I want you back, Ali. I won't stop until I've got you." This sounded ominous. Why did he need to turn himself in? What had the man done? Surely not. Lady Darrowby Jones slipped away through the rhododendrons and massive lilacs that made perfect listening into other people's conversations territory. Unfortunately, she tripped on a rhododendron root and came crashing to the ground. "What's that?" Baritone's voice sang across the shrubbery like the charge of the Light Brigade. Lady Darrowby Jones picked herself up and felt her ankle. No damage done, but they were moving through the shrubbery, coming after her. She stopped at the edge of the lawn. They were still arguing as they made their way towards her position. She could just see Baritone swiping at the bushes with a raspberry cane. At least that slowed them down. She couldn't risk being caught spying on them. She made for the nearest point of entry to the house, the old front door, forgetting in her rush that the door was a devil to open again once closed. Bounding up the steps, She registered Darby Duck lying decapitated on the ground next to its plinth. She registered this fact, but didn't really take it in. Such was her worry at the angry, squabbling voices following her. All that concerned her is not being caught eavesdropping. Which she eventually managed, slumping back against the old oak door once safely inside. She had thrown her entire and not inconsiderable weight against it, forcing it open seconds before Baritone came around the side of the house. "May I help you, milady? You look quite startled." The butler's voice shook her all over again. "No, Torino. I was just out running a busy bee. Nothing to worry about." Lady Darby Jones tracked down Alice later that morning, catching her, inevitably, at the stables. "How is Champion these days?" she asked, knowing that her daughter knew this was just an introduction to something else. "Much improved?" Lady Alice replied with typical abruptness. "Flint's the worry now." "Why's that?" "Looking tired but grumpy too." "It's his age, my dear. It happens to us all." Flint was the first pony for Lady Alice, seemingly huge for the 4-year-old, now the smallest in her growing collection. "I want to talk about something else, my dear." Lady Darby Jones tried to soften her words by adding the odd, "my dear." Actually, she was rather scared of her strong-minded daughter. "You saw me arguing with Barry Fatlump Baritone, didn't you?" "Exactly. I did, and I have to ask you what you were arguing about." "None of your beeswax, mother." Lady Alice could be quite tiresome on occasion, and this was just one of those occasions. Lady Darby Jones tried various techniques to get her daughter to cough up the subject matter, including bribes, new saddle, maybe, threats, banning riding, and sweet cajoling. "Please, my dear, pretty please," but all without success. "It's none of your business, mother. Do I ask for every detail of every conversation you've ever had with Daddy?" One more attempt was available to Lady Darby Jones, an appeal to reason. Unfortunately, as she opened her mouth to deliver that appeal, Lady Alice started to walk away, saddle on one arm, a bridle lodged on her riding hat, so the reins fell along her back like a massive headdress. "You see, I heard you asking himself to give himself up. If he's done something bad, well, we need to know about it." Lady Darby Jones called to her departing back. It produced nothing more than a chanted, "Can't tell, won't tell, shan't tell, William tell." No doubt something from her childhood, although Lady Alice had never really had any friends, so who could say where she had learned it from? "I'll have to go to the—" But Lady Alice was around the corner, swaying her mighty headdress until she disappeared from view. "Well, I will then." But first she went inside to change her shoes for boots. You never knew when you might need the extra support of a pair of stout boots. Chapter 9. The police station was much like many village police stations. A reception area at the front, cells at the back, and, in between, a couple of offices and a tiny break room, cluttered with notices that nobody ever read. DCI Rory Rude Manners had taken the big office that was previously the domain of Sergeant Haddock Fisher. In fact, he was brutally ejected after 17 years in residence as the senior police officer. Lady Darby Jones vaguely remembered the previous time there had been anyone above a sergeant in the post. He had been a shining bold egg of an inspector, whose uniform always looked like you could fit 2 of them in at a time. A pair of inspectors, saving money on the uniform allowance. Luckily for Manners, Sergeant Fisher was a happy-go-lucky type of person. He didn't appear that way with a glum look about him, hence the choice of nickname, but he always said life was too short to worry yourself to death. Lady Alice had once, years earlier, pointed out to the sergeant that life would indeed be short if one worried oneself to the point of death all the time, an observation she was particularly pleased about to this day. She got, in return, a ruffling of the hair, for which she stuck her long tongue out at him. Many would say an archetypal encounter with Lady Alice. Sergeant Fisher could have made life miserable for Manners. Any sergeant in any service, whether police, army, marines, or even the brand-new RAF, had the power to inflict stress in abundance on their senior officer. To be ejected one morning from your office of 17 years was not to be tolerated, unless you were Sergeant Haddock Fisher, for whom life was too short. The fact that the police station was built on Darrowby land, loaned to the Oxford Constabulary, and to be returned the moment that particular station was deemed to be surplus to requirements, gave Lady Darrowby Jones, in her opinion, some form of ownership rights. Only Rude Manners did not see it that way. "I think you've got the wrong man, Manners," she said before sitting down, before even being invited to sit down, which never actually came. Nevertheless, Lady Darrowby Jones sat. She did have an interest in the place, maybe not the chairs, but the ground upon which they were situated. "Not again!" Manners sighed, pushing his vainglorious report to the chief super under a stack of papers about pig rustling in the neighbouring hamlet of Little Spire, which, incidentally, had no such spire, and not even a church that could host a spire. "Listen to me, Manners. Lord Baritone is in the vicinity of Darrowby. I saw him the other day, and again this very morning. Lord Baritone of Darrowby Choir, I presume?" Manners' wit was actually not too bad. Darrowby had tried a similar joke when Alice's suitor had first come to stay, and received a titter or two from his audience, which Lady Darrowby Jones now felt compelled to replicate. But that was before Baritone's real personality came to be known to them. He was the top candidate for the position of village murderer, and Lady Darrowby Jones saw only black when she thought of the monster lord who had been so close to walking down the aisle with her daughter. "He's got a furious temper. I heard Lady Alice—" "So we've got an Alice in Wonderland now, have we?" "My daughter, Lady Alice Darrowby Jones. They just split up a few weeks ago. They had a furious row this morning, and I overheard her say he should turn himself in." Rory Manners sat back in his chair, the one he had inherited from Sergeant Codd, or whatever his name was, and placed his hand behind his head, as if seeking to hold the weight of his mighty brain while he pondered the imponderable and worked out the unworkoutable. "So, just because you want to get your toy boy off the hook, I'm supposed to send my scarce resources out into the jungle to search for some toffee-nosed geezer who's done nothing to offend you than break up with your daughter?" Put that way, it did seem a bit unreasonable. Yet Lady Darrowby Jones persisted, showering the DCI for 10 minutes with real and imagined slights by Lord Barry Baritone. "Lady Jones," he seemed incapable of getting her name right, or preferred not to, "I ain't got the time to listen to a character assassination of some poor bloke whose only crime is to run a mile from your daughter. If you have nothing to say other than how bad Lord this or that is, then can you please leave me to get on with me work?" There's a rule about insulting language that says the deeper the insult, the longer it takes to register in the recipient. You could see it in action in the police office in Darrowby, had you been there. Lady Darrowby Jones sat, absolutely still and silent, for 10 seconds, before rising from her chair and leaving without another word. She had been dismissed like a naughty schoolgirl. Not that she had any experience of being a naughty schoolgirl. Crossing the reception area, her head spinning with indignation, she went straight into a big blue uniform, finding herself drenched in coffee in the process. "Watch out! Oh dear, Lady Darrowby Jones!" A strong blue arm came down towards the floor to yank her back to upright. "Are you all right, Lady Darrowby Jones? I'm so sorry. It's just I wasn't expecting someone to fly out like they were about to be arrested and charged, you mean?" Lady Darrowby Jones wouldn't have put it past Rude Manners to have actually arrested her for the crime of wasting police resources. "Quite so. Do you remember me, Lady Darrowby Jones? You officiated at the Open Day at school a few years ago. I came runner-up in the sack race and won the egg and spoon." She clearly had no recollection. One little snotty boy looked much the same as another. "Who's ish, milady?" "Useless? Did anyone actually bear that name, and then join the police force? Rather become a monk and be known as Brother Bob or Brother Tom than put up with the constant teasing." "Who's ish, milady, of Dutch origin, my father always used to say, but a long time in England now, Lady Darrowby Jones. PC Frank Hoosish at your service." By now, Lady Darrowby Jones was on her feet, looking down at her coffee-stained jacket and skirt, thinking of the spectacle she would make walking back through the village looking like a dirty tea towel. "I need to clean myself up, Constable." She couldn't trust herself not to come out with frankly useless, rather than Frank Hoosish, so fell back on the safety of Constable. "My little cottage is directly opposite, milady. I could offer you something from my mother's wardrobe, while we sponge down your suit and let it dry." "Very well, Constable. Lead the way." He seemed like a nice man, certainly polite enough. The alternative was to walk back home stinking of caffeine, not a pleasant prospect. Lady Darrowby Jones felt better with a change of clothes, although she had to squeeze into the largest skirt and blouse she could find in the mother's wardrobe. PC Hoosish provided a sponge for her to wipe the worst off her own clothes, also finding a wickerwork bag she could place the soiled items in. "Might I ask the reason for your visit to our little station today, Lady Darrowby Jones?" "It's about the murder of poor Matthew Carter," she replied, suddenly wondering whether there was another route to rescue poor Alfie. "We have somebody helping with inquiries," Frank replied, "but you must know that because he's your husband's secretary." "The poor man is as innocent as the day is long," she replied, thinking it a stupid expression. Summer days were long and winter ones were short. Where did innocence fit in that scheme of things? "It's not my area, of course," Frank said, "but there must be some way to prove his innocence. Have you considered an investigation of the Dowager House?" "No, Manners said they'd searched it thoroughly." "Well, Lady Darrowby Jones, there's thorough, and then there's Hoosish thorough. We could, if you were up to it, take a peek tonight." It was quickly agreed. PC Frank Hoosish, or Frankly Useless, as he was known around the station, would accompany Private Investigator Darrowby Jones on a midnight recce of the Dowager House that very night. "Isn't the place shut up as a crime scene?" Lady Darrowby Jones asked. "It is, Lady Darrowby Jones, but that's the beauty of going along there with a serving policeman." "Excellent. Well, I'll see you at the gates at midnight." As she walked home in borrowed skirt and borrowed blouse, she felt a mixture of emotions. There was definitely some excitement in there, buckets of it to be precise. A little trepidation, perhaps? Yes, but also something else. Something to do with PC Frank Hoosish. The name rang a bell, but she just couldn't work out the context. She knew everyone in the village, at least by sight, so she knew the long-suffering, saintly Mrs. Hoosish, who ran one of the flower arrangement teams for the church, had done so all the time since her father, old Jonesy, had insisted on adding the Jones to the Darrowby to produce the first ever Darrowby Jones. But why long-suffering? Why was there a part of her inside that was terrified? She was making progress in the case. She told herself that another couple of days, and she would have it all sewn up with Alfie free, so that Darrowby would barely register the fact that his secretary had been missing. The vile Lord Baritone would soon be nicked, collared, pinched and nabbed. Those were words she liked to employ with regard to Barry Baritone. Yes, they were making progress. Time to put any misgivings to one side. That night promised to be an adventure. Chapter 10. All was not well back at Darrowby Hall. Lord Darrowby Jones was waiting for his wife's return, anxiously pacing the hall carpet, wearing out the picture of Agincourt or Bannockburn, or whatever medieval battle it depicted, with warriors with heads too large for their bodies, as if those ancient times produced a species of human with super-brains perched on feeble shoulders. Lady Darrowby Jones had always considered the past to be a quaint diversion that meant nothing today. Only the present mattered. Hence, the carpet could be an illustration of a Martian invasion for all she cared. "What's up, my dear?" "Ah, there you are, dear, at long last. I was about to send out search parties." Lord Darrowby Jones peered at his wife, then asked why she was wearing such ridiculously small clothes. "It's a long story, dear. Let me hear what troubles you." "Ah, it's that wretched daughter of yours." Lady Darby Jones had often noted her husband seemed to forget his parental ownership of the brat when particularly anguished over her actions. She used it as an indicator of said anguish and regarded the situation now to be serious. "Come," she said, knowing how to deal with it. "I know it's early, but there's a whisky and soda needs drinking. Let's go to my study and talk it all through." 10 minutes later, a somewhat calmer Darby, second whisky half gone, recounted what had caused his blood pressure to jump. It seemed that Lady Alice had offered to help him, feeling bad that her daddy was left without a secretary just weeks before the symposium was due to start. "I jumped at the offer naturally," he said. "Big mistake, dear." It was about as big a mistake as one could make, ranking up there with Icarus flying with his waxy wings up towards a boiling hot cauldron they call the sun. "You know, she thinks of nothing but horses." "I asked her if she was serious," Lord Darby Jones groaned. "I asked her if she was serious about it, and she confirmed with a big, 'Yes, Daddy, of course I am.' Second mistake, dear. You must know by now that our little darling has absolutely no concentration or staying power at all. On a horse, well, that's one thing, but out of the saddle, she's got less to keep her upright than my daisies in a storm." "That's the problem," he replied. "You've hit it on the head, my dear. She's nowhere to be found, and has misplaced my whole specimen tray, or rather, taken it with her on whatever escapade she's gallivanting about on. Without it, I can't host the symposium next month. I'd be the laughing-stock of—" "The world of slugs." Lady Darby Jones completed his well for him. Then she took a different attitude. Ringing the bell for Torino, she ordered refills. "A large whisky and soda for Lord Darby Jones, and another pink gin for me, please, Torino. Kindly bring them to the library." "Yes, me lady, straight away." He was gone, his soft shoes making no sound as he glided away. "Come on, dear. Let's go to the scene of the crime and see what clues there are. We'll track down our delightful offspring if it's the last thing we ever do." Lord Darby Jones perked up with his wife taking charge, such that he commented it was the specimen tray he sought, not the brat that had taken it. Lady Darby Jones, however, had one thought in mind. What if Baritone had got to Lady Alice? Certainly the police would be useless. Hadn't Manners made it clear that Barry Baritone could commit high treason, actually puncturing holes in George V with impunity? They had their man in young Alfie Burrows, and nothing else mattered. The library did contain a clue, in fact 2 of them, both contained within Alfie's diary left open on the desk he had been allocated for his secretarial work. The first was embarrassing, more so because it glossed over the obvious defects in Lady Alice's character, presenting her to a fictitious world as a perfect goddess. Copious notes covered descriptions of Lady Alice that would defy belief. She was the handsomest young lady that ever graced this earth. Lady Darby Jones even read a comparison with Helen of Troy that came out firmly in Lady Alice's favour. Then there was her charitable approach to life, her giving and giving again. "Doesn't sound quite right," Lord Darby Jones said, when she passed it to him to read. "The poor lad's besotted with Alice, and has put her on a pedestal. Our daughter sharing anything is impossible. Certainly sharing favourably in looks with Helen of Troy is—" "Is that old Troy's daughter? The Troys of Somerset?" Lord Darby Jones asked. "Yes, dear." It wasn't worth the trouble to explain, especially as it would involve an ancient history lesson given by someone not too clear about the facts, other than Helen of Troy was A, a looker, B, had been dead for quite some time, and C, a lot of men fought over her. Alice had clearly seen his diary. Lord Darby Jones told her he had stationed their daughter at the same desk that Alfie was allocated to. The big question this begged is why would Alice desert her post on reading all about how worshipped she was by Alfie? Most young women would be easily traced in such circumstances, glued to the seat and reading more of the same. The answer came when Lady Darby Jones turned a few pages back and found clue number 2. She knew immediately that her daughter had read the same entry, because she saw one of Flint's distinctive grey mane hairs lodged between the pages. Clear as day on August 5th was an entry stating that Alfie Burrows, on wandering around the grounds at night thinking about Alice, had heard these strange noises coming from the derelict house, followed by something similar on the night of August 6th, but this time in the, also derelict, east wing of Darrowby Hall. Somebody was clearly shifting some pretty heavy stuff around. Yet the police had searched the Dowager House and found nothing there. She would be searching tonight, and had little doubt that her efforts would confirm the results of the boys in blue. "We need to go to the East Wing," she said to her husband. Why hadn't she thought to look there first? She mentally slapped herself for overlooking the obvious. "She's in the East Wing? My specimen tray's there?" "No, not at all. Well, maybe." Her husband's words brought more reality to the scene. Another mental slapping due for not considering what was right in front of her eyes. Lady Alice wasn't in the East Wing at all. Bear in mind that Lady Darrowby Jones had carried her daughter for 9 months before the nannies could get a look in. Consequently, she knew her intimately. There was just enough about her to do the right thing. Alice had read Alfie's diary in just the same order as Lady Darrowby Jones had done. That is, backwards from the last entry, where it was left open. Alice had read the repeated fascination with her, and then skipped back, trying to find when this all started. Instead, she had found what Alfie had written about the noises at night, and then she had deserted her post and made herself scarce. The big question in Lady Darrowby Jones's mind was where had she gone to do this scarcer-than-scarce stuff? What would Alice do next? To answer that, she realised, meant asking what she would do next in the same situation. She sat back and chuckled, much to her husband's irritation, because it suddenly clicked as to exactly where she would find Lady Alice. Chapter 11. Lady Darrowby Jones had the good sense to change before setting off again, choosing a sturdy yet cool summer suit, ideal for the time of year. She had spent precious minutes reassuring her husband, and knew she had little time to lose if she was to track down her errant daughter. Still, by striding out, she could cover the mile in just under 15 minutes, albeit she might be a little short of breath on arrival. It was a perfect day for a walk. Normally she would dally in the garden, perhaps stop at the gatehouse for a chat with the ancient Mrs. Bush, who, along with her husband, had tended the gates to Darrowby Hall for decades, finding time to rear 8 children and countless grandchildren at the same time. Today was not that day, however. She avoided the gardeners and waved at Mrs. Bush, mouthing a quick, "Good afternoon," as she drove herself on, one foot after the other. She could have called for the car, but the rule was too well ingrained now. Less than 2 miles distant meant 2 feet, over 2 miles, and you could go on 4 wheels. It wouldn't even have saved any time. Smith, the chauffeur, was often asleep at this time. Waking him, allowing time for him to dress and get the car from the garage by the stables and start it up, would all take longer than the brisk walk she had started on. She was looking for Frank Hoosish, but bumped into Sergeant Haddock Fisher instead. "Hoosish?" he said when she asked if she knew where the young constable was. "Why on earth do you want anything to do with Frank Hoosish? He's off duty as of half an hour ago. Sudden change to the roster. Can I help you with anything, Lady Darrowby Jones? Seeing as you're here, I mean." "It's not much," she replied, doing what most British types do when in a jam, understating the true extent of a problem, putting a brave face on it. She looked at the sergeant a moment longer than was polite. Glum, without a doubt, but something solid and dependable about him. Yes, she would give it a whirl. "Normally, I'd ask to speak to the boss," she said, then thought that was a clumsy start. Fisher had been the boss forever, right up until this week when DCI Rude Manners had walked in, flashing his badge, or whatever policemen do when taking up new appointments, and upsetting the gentle rhythm of Darrowby Police Station with his outside ways. "I meant no offence. None taken, Lady Darrowby Jones, I absolutely assure you. If you can keep a secret—" Lady Darrowby-Jones quickly assured the solid and dependable sergeant that she was world-famous in keeping secrets. "Well, it seems I'm in rather the same boat as you," he replied when finally allowed to. "Explain." "The new boss hasn't got any time for the old boss," he said, looking extra glum all of a sudden. "In fact, he's mentioned retirement 3 times in 3 days, and a new posting 4 times. New broom and all that." "Precisely, Lady Darrowby-Jones. I'm supernumerary, on borrowed time, out on a limb and in the cold. The blessed DCI doesn't want me poking my fat snout into his police station. Actually, it's my police station, or rather it's my husband's." Lady Darrowby-Jones couldn't resist the correction. Sergeant Fisher responded by opening his fish-like mouth and laughing loud and clear in a most unlike fish manner as could be imagined. The man had a soul and a heart. He was a good one. Certainly a bod to confide in. "Sergeant, could you come up to the hall this evening?" "I certainly could, Lady Darrowby-Jones. I'll come directly after my tea." "Splendid!" She turned to go, and then remembered the reason for her visit. She turned back and asked whether he had noticed Lady Alice visiting that day. "I did, Lady Darrowby-Jones, and the sound of the fireworks is still ringing in my ears. She came to see the DCI, much, I believe, as you did this morning. She left in quite a mood, dare I say it, much as you did too. Mind you, you've raised a feisty one there, make no mistake about it. I wouldn't want to cross her today, not in the state of mind she was in." Sergeant Fisher added several more qualities to Lady Darrowby-Jones's compendium on him when he arrived at 5:45 p.m. that evening. First, he came in mufti, also shedding with his uniform a little of his shape, so he seemed a mite shorter and several mites rounder as he sat with the whisky and ice in the orangery at the back of the house. "How can I help, Lady Darrowby-Jones?" In reply, Lady Darrowby-Jones set down her pink gin and slid Alfie's diary across the coffee table to the sergeant. This is where the second extra quality came in. It took him about 2.5 minutes to get a full understanding of the situation. "This is Alfie Burrows' diary?" he asked, holding it in one hand as if it was sacred. In many ways it was. "It is, and it is pretty good proof that Alfie's not our man. The problem is getting the DCI to accept that. He's hell-bent on getting his first murder conviction, and nothing much is going to stop him. We can." "How? Has he been charged yet?" There was a detective series on the radio where the main man in charge of the investigation never answered a question, except by asking one himself. Lady Darrowby-Jones felt a true heir to the radio star in this regard. "He was charged this morning. He'll go before the magistrates tomorrow and be remanded in custody in Oxford Prison. You know they'll pick on him in there. First, he's a gentle soul. Second, they're a patriotic bunch, your average prison population. They'll tear him to pieces for knocking off a war hero. See if they don't. Then we have only one course of action, Sergeant." "You mean—" "Intelligent and perceptive. He should be back in charge rather than the jumped-up DCI. The final recognition of how fantastic a chap Sergeant Haddock Fisher was came when he accepted her escape plan without question. Correction, he did question some parts, but only to improve them. "We have one final problem, Lady Darrowby-Jones," he said, draining his glass and refusing another refill. "Being? You can't take part in it." "Why ever not?" "Well, first, you have a date tonight. No, don't be offended, Lady Darrowby-Jones. I don't mean a date. I mean a separate assignment. You're going to search the Dowager House tonight. Did you forget?" Lady Darrowby-Jones had forgotten, and asked how on earth the sergeant knew. "Easy," he replied, fish-face moving into a warm grin. "I put 2 and 2 together and came up with 5. I saw the whole thing when Hoosish bumped into you this morning. He took you to his mother's place across the road, and you were there much longer than strictly necessary for a change of clothes. I wondered what you could be talking about. Then along comes PC Hoosish with a request that he be put on the Dowager House guard duty from 11 p.m. to 3 a.m. tonight. most insistent about it, so I went ahead with it, meaning to turn up later on and check on him before bedtime. Well, I put two and two together and, hey presto, I believe I'm right in suggesting you have a date in a derelict house tonight with the most useless police constable we've ever had the bad luck to take on. Spot on, and a brilliant piece of deduction, worthy of the very best piece of thinking any fiction can throw our way. She meant it, but not without a huge streak of jealousy. Why couldn't she be the one to make the big breakthroughs? Lord knew she was trying hard enough. That leaves a problem of who my partner in crime is going to be for our little plan tonight. There's nobody else at the station I'd risk getting in trouble by helping us. It's a serious business helping a murder suspect get away. Yes, I appreciate the risk you're taking and admire you for it, Sergeant. But I think I might just have the answer. Being? Lady Darby-Jones turned around in her seat and called that it was all right to come out from behind the screen now. After no more than a second of delay, Lady Alice appeared, dressed in a black catsuit and looking every bit your common criminal. Chapter 12. Two girls on two different missions, walking together in the dead of night, all the way down the drive to the squat stone lodge house where Mr. and Mrs. Bush slept, their 85-year-old limbs wrapped around each other. Carefully now, not to wake the dogs, Bertie and Bunter. The lodge dogs were always Bertie and Bunter, tradition dying very, very slowly in northwest Oxfordshire. On they go to the village edge, where our two darkly wrapped figures separate, one going left to the police station, the other straight on for the Dowager House. Mother and daughter, dressed to fade into the dark night, a slight moon preventing stumbling on roots and stones. Two people and two missions. "Lady Darby-Jones!" a voice hissed from the bushes. "Is that you?" But Lady Darby-Jones knew it was him, her navigator for the night. "I had to swap my roster," Frank said. Lady Darby-Jones knew that, but pretended surprise, showing gratitude for the action to accommodate her own personal search of the Dowager House, yet wondering two things: why everybody thought this personable young constable was frankly useless, and what it was that she knew about the Hoosish family. Something from the past haunted her. "Follow me," Frank whispered, as they walked down the stubby drive of the Dowager House. "No, not the front door. Around the back. That's open already. It's the best way in. Do you know when the house was last occupied?" He continued in half-whispers, as if a self-appointed tour guide for a sacred place. It was sacred, Lady Darby-Jones thought, because it was where Matthew had last been fit and well. A war hero had been murdered here, and it was her self-appointed duty to find out who committed the heinous crime. Yet half her mind wasn't on the job at all. The other half was across the village at the police station, sharing the adventure Alice was having with Sergeant Haddock Fisher on duty. On the other hand, she knew that Lady Alice wouldn't stop for 1 minute to think about her mother, or for any other living creature for that matter. Her daughter's mind boasted razor-sharp focus on the assignment in hand. Even though it had some pretty nasty aspects, Lady Alice would have to endure to get through to accomplish the mission now underway. The first part of Lady Alice's assignment, as Lady Darby-Jones later learnt from both Lady Alice and Sergeant Fisher, with Alfie making a contribution as to subsequent events that night, was relatively easy, simply a matter of following directions. Sergeant Fisher let her in at the side door, the one that was usually bolted from within. She wouldn't later use that for her escape because it would give them away, at least the collusion from within, for how else would a bolted door be unbolted? She and Alfie would have to leave brazenly by the main entrance when the time came. First things first, the sergeant clicked open the cell door and went inside to rouse the surprised Alfie. "Quiet," he said, although there was no reason now to be so. A village police station is hardly the most secure establishment. There was just the sergeant on duty, meaning no bustle of colleagues in and out. "It's just as well that the constable wanted to swap duties with you, Sergeant Fisher," Lady Alice said. "That was a piece of luck. Talk about 2 birds with 1 stone, eh?" They bundled Alfie out of the cell, through the office area, past the break room and into the reception. The door was just ahead. There wasn't a sound inside the station, or outside as Darrowby lay sleeping. They moved towards the main entrance. "Just a minute, Lady Alice," Fisher said. "You've got to give me my cover." "Of course, how careless of me." They'd been through this in the library just a few hours earlier. Alice hoped she would strike the sergeant in just the right place, knocking him out, but no other damage. "Mr. Burrows, can you stand right here? Keep absolutely still, and I'll be back in half a tick." "What's going on?" Alfie asked, completely bemused and definitely not up to speed. Well, imagine facing a trial, followed by the distinct likelihood of swinging at the end of a rope 1 minute, and then being busted out of jail by the love of your life, who you had become quite resigned to never seeing again. Unless in some bizarre twist, the judge decided on a public execution, and you spotted the love of your life in the crowd, looking on with total dispassion but considerable practical interest. Wouldn't you be confused in such circumstances? Yet suspect number 1 managed to stay still on his own, even when he heard a loud banging noise, as if something heavy and hard had hit something else equally hard. "I had to clobber the good sergeant on the head with a chair leg," she said, as she returned to the reception area and hustled Alfie towards the entrance. "Otherwise he wouldn't have had an alibi, now would he?" "I suppose not," was the best poor Alfie could issue at the moment. "We're going to leave now, Mr. Burrows, so walk out slowly and steadily. I don't want the slightest sign of panic." It was only outside, under the gaze of 2 street lamps, that Alfie realised that Lady Alice had changed from cat burglar to copper by raiding the lockers in the break room. "How did—" "Just keep walking," she said in return, grabbing him by the arm as if leading him on without the slightest concern for his well-being. After all, who would care about a murderer being moved at night, presumably for his own safety? His fuddled mind came to grips with why she was dressed as a policewoman. Any late-night dog walkers, or those returning from the Darrowby Arms, would believe what they saw with their eyes. That's the point at which the hue and cry started, distinctly coming from that portion of the village where the Dowager House sat, slowly crumbling back into nature. "What was that?" "Just some wretched kids kicking up a fuss about something or other. Nothing to worry about. We're just going to get you away quickly and quietly." He noticed a definite sense of new urgency about her, and picked up his pace accordingly. The noise did come from the Dowager House. It took the form of a woman's squeal, quickly followed by others across the common and on down the high street. Things hadn't gone completely to plan in the other mission set for that late summer's night. For a start, there wasn't anything there in the old house at all. Not surprising, really, considering that the police had already combed through the place 3 times. Yet there was something there, and it suddenly dawned on Lady Darrowby Jones. She first realised it when she knocked her head against the wall. She needed to wipe away the damp that had transferred from the wall to her head. She put her hand up to do the task, expecting to find evidence of spiders and other creepy crawlies, a pet hate of hers, along with snakes and rats. Rodents and insects just didn't get on with Lady Darrowby Jones. She expected to brush against a cobweb, yet nothing was there. She felt over a wider circumference. Still nothing. "The place is too clean," she said suddenly, far too loudly, noting that Frank stopped a moment to stare at her. "Shh!" They stood, rooted to the spot, until Frank prepared to recommence their journey around the house. But Lady Darrowby Jones had seen enough. Turning at the point where Frank Hoosish was to lead them upstairs, she fled back through kitchen and scullery, and straight into the arms of Professor Sir John Plumer. He caught her, but the momentum multiplied by the mass was too much for his slender frame, and he fell back, both hitting their heads with resounding cracks on the side of the stone sink in the scullery. "What the—" Did she say these words, or just think them, as she fell into unconsciousness? She woke to grimness all around. For a moment, she thought she was still in the scullery of the Dowager House. Then she smelt the hospital, and knew where they had taken her. "What the—" "Hush, Lady Darrowby Jones, don't try talking yet." "Sister Farringdon?" she said, in defiance of medical instructions. "What the—" Then she slipped back into sleep, woken again by a different but now familiar voice. "It's important I interview the suspect. I'll have you up for contempt. See if I won't." "It's all right, Sister Farrington. Let the Chief Inspector in." "Right, about blooming time. Now, madam—" "My name is Lady Darby Jones. At least it was when I collided with the Professor and slipped into another world. That's Professor Sir John Plumer, in case you have difficulty in getting his name right as well." "Remarkable," came the voice of Sister Farrington. "Lady Darby Jones has the most frightful bang to her head. Witness the bruise developing beautifully. Yet she's as clear as crystal on waking from her slumber. And ready to go home. Could you call the hall and have Smith come around? Tell him to bring Lily with some fresh clothes." "Not before I've interviewed you, Lady Darby Jones, please." That last word made her turn towards the policeman. It was meant in earnest. Yet the Chief Inspector didn't do earnest, and would be the first to remind the world he was as tough as nails. Then it clicked. Manners' world had fallen apart. That meant the jailbreak had been a success. If Alice had been caught in the act, Manners would be cock-a-hoop right now. In one swell move, Manners had lost his murder suspect and presided over a wholly embarrassing raid on the police station he had been in charge of for less than a week. Despite the splitting headache that throbbed like a heavy truck going over a cattle grid, she smiled to herself. She had what she needed from her mission, while it seemed Alice's had gone exactly according to plan. Things were definitely looking up. Chapter 13. Where do you hide someone wanted by the long arm of the law? Do you whisk them away to some god-forsaken desert or remote wind-swept hill? Won't that just make them all the more obvious for their standing out as different? Lady Alice pondered this as she frog-marched suspect number 1 out of the village, past Bertie and Bunter, one of whom sniffed the air but judged the smell of Lady Alice to be no threat, then on up the drive to Darrowby Hall. "It's dead simple," she told her mother in her bedroom later that day. Her mother had taken herself to bed on arrival back at the hall, claiming a splitting headache, but quickly summoning Lady Alice as soon as that tiresome detective was sent on his way. "I put him in the most obvious place," she continued, clearly pleased with her logic. "Where's that, daughter dear?" Her headache was bad, but nothing a little progress with the case wouldn't solve. More worryingly than the pain had been the doctor's strict insistence on laying off the pink gin until the throbbing subsided. "Why, here in the hall, of course." "What?" Lady Darby Jones shot upright in her bed, fear breaking out as perspiration on her face. "You've done what?" "They'll never think of looking for him right here in the hall." Now Alice sounded a little less certain. It had seemed a brilliant move in the early hours. Why did brilliant ideas at night never seem as good come morning? Was it something to do with the sharp rays of the sun, delving into every little weakness of the plan, exposing the defects like warts on a face? "The Detective Chief Inspector is interviewing the staff as we speak, Alice. Who saw him enter?" Alice replied no one spotted them. She was confident about that. Yet Lady Darby Jones wasn't convinced. Then she had an idea. Later on, Alice had the temerity to claim the idea as her own, but that was the future, and now was what mattered. "Did you see the Chief Inspector yesterday?" she asked her daughter, the idea growing by leaps and bounds as she looked at it from every angle. "Briefly. He wouldn't discuss it much, kept moaning about like mother, like daughter, which I didn't understand one jot." "That's because it's true, dear. You are a lot like me. You see, I went to see him yesterday as well. Did you mention Alfie's diary?" "Never got a chance. Did you work all that out then, Mother? You are quite the detective." That was huge, given where it came from. Lady Darby Jones diverted from her main thrust for a minute to suggest a mother-daughter hug. Alice obliged, but clearly reluctantly. "I never got a chance to mention the diary to Manners," she finally said, hug over and back on track. "That means no one knows about it, unless you told anyone else, Mother." "Only your father, dear." That's fine. Unless it's something to do with slugs, Daddy will have forgotten all about it long ago. But how does this help us hide Mr. Burrows somewhere safe? Simple. His diary entry was the main plank of his defence. Agreed? Agreed. But it's also the only place that the East Wing is mentioned. Don't you see, dear? We can keep Alfie Burrows at the Hall. We just need to move him to the East Wing. Nobody will think to look there. Mother, you're a genius. Lady Darrowby-Jones sank back on her pillows, a glow to her tired pink face. She had been called many things by her daughter, but never a genius. The move from attic to East Wing passed without a hitch. Lady Darrowby-Jones enjoyed hearing the story from Alice of slipping by doorways and rushing up the back stairs, while the Chief Inspector and his minions interviewed the staff. All safe and sound and delightful dereliction, Alice summarised for her mother, sitting on the edge of her bed, her green eyes shining with excitement. Lady Darrowby-Jones hadn't seen such vitality since the poor girl had started dating Lord Baritone. Lord Baritone! And Professor Sir John Plumer, too. Both had to rank as serious suspects, one driven by brute force to get Lady Alice back by his side, the other presumably motivated to do anything to diminish her husband's reputation, following their disastrous row that led to Sir John leaving early in a fit of rage. Both, it now seemed, had hung around Darrowby rather than shooting off with their tails between their legs. Both had motive and occasion to do terrible deeds. Lady Darrowby-Jones almost mentioned Baritone to her daughter, just stopping herself and changing course at the last moment. She didn't want to destroy the little fondness that their joint but separate escapades the previous night had seemed to engender. She would tackle that later. For now it was enough to enjoy a bit of mother-daughter stuff and nonsense. "You'll need to feed him twice a day at least," she said to Alice. "Who?" Showing that Alice had also let her mind wander. "Alfie, of course. You can't have him surviving on brick rubble and water leaking through the roof." "Can't Torino take it?" Alice removed her hand from her mother's, clearly resisting the idea of playing waitress to someone as lowly as her father's secretary. "Think, dear. The fewer people who know about his presence, the better." "I suppose so, Mother, although I shan't enjoy the task one jot." Lady Darrowby-Jones had one more visitor while she remained bedbound. A very crestfallen Manners knocked on her door just as she was drifting off to sleep, a discarded supper tray occupying the spot where Alice had perched herself earlier. But Manners wasn't looking to sit down. Nothing so intimate. "Lady Darrowby-Jones, my apologies for bothering you during your recuperation. My apologies also for being somewhat anxious and abrupt in our previous meetings. I was convinced. Apologies accepted, of course. How may I help you, DCI Manners?" "Well, it's a bit awkward, m'lady." "I can't help you if you won't spit it out. Sir." The sir was a generous addition, designed to encourage him to talk. "It's just that I'm somewhat stumped. Yesterday, I was happily writing my report for the Chief Super in Oxford, aiming to send it off today. Now, I've got to write that my only suspect slipped out of the cells last night, bumping me sergeant on the head in the process." "Oh dear, is your sergeant all right?" She knew already, of course. Alice had made discreet inquiries. "Yes, a little like you, Lady Darrowby-Jones. A large bump on the head, but otherwise nothing that a few days of rest won't put right." "I don't intend to rest beyond today, Chief Inspector." Quite. And that's me point, m'lady. I sort of need your assistance with this one, m'lady." "Don't m'lady me, Chief Inspector. That's what the staff do. Lady Darrowby-Jones will be fine." "Yes, Lady Darrowby-Jones. Can we talk suspects?" "Pull up a chair and take notes," she replied, straightening her pillow so she sat more upright. "Now, I have two I believe you should look into post-haste. The one I tried to talk to you about yesterday—" "My apologies, Lady Darrowby-Jones." He really seemed contrite, lost as well. Lady Darrowby-Jones felt quite sorry for him. "That's all right. Allow me to concentrate." That was a polite way of telling him not to interrupt her. "The first is Lord Baritone. Lady Alice split with him a few weeks ago, and the little so-and-so has taken it badly. He's got quite a temper, and I overheard a discussion in which he was told to give himself in. I think that's significant. You'll probably find him staying at the Darrowby Arms. Thank you. And the other? It just came to me the other day. She was being deliberately vague, not entirely sure how much the Chief Inspector knew of her midnight escapade. That Sir John Plumer is also hanging around. He is a limichologist, just like Lord Darrowby Jones, and they are supposed to be planning this great symposium next month at Darrowby Hall. Well, they had a fearful row about something my husband won't talk to me about. Probably infinitely petty, but that's boys for you. Well, Sir John is also hanging around like a bad penny. I think he has ill intentions and wouldn't put something like murder beyond the man. It seems you're concentrating on people wanting to do damage against the Darrowby Jonesies, he replied, pausing in his note-taking. Well, why else would this be happening? Lady Darrowby Jones said in retort, not really understanding how it could be anything else. Yes, someone is out to hurt us. I don't know why or who, but I at least know of their malicious intentions. Now, you must leave, Chief Inspector. I have 100 things to do and need to get dressed for most of them. Of course, Lady Darrowby Jones, you have been most kind. There is one other thing, though. When poor Matthew was dying, what did he say? Polite man. He knew it was a rhetorical question, but provided the answer all the same. Precisely. Not a word for 8 years, then suddenly outs with polite man. Find a polite man, and I believe you're going to be warm, Chief Inspector. Very warm indeed. Chapter 14. Lady Darrowby Jones had a complete surprise that evening. The first ever phone call to Darrowby Hall. She had forgotten that she had recently insisted on the installation of a telephone, against the wishes of her husband, for whom any invention in the last 40 years was a step too far. She didn't hear the telephone ring. Instead, Torino pattered into the library, where Lady Darrowby Jones was enjoying a second pink gin, very much against the advice of the Darrowby doctor. "Milady, someone to talk to you." His rich Italian voice seemed to play with her, adding a level of spice most country houses lacked with their staid British butlers. "At this hour?" A wholly unreasonable response. It was 6:15, still prime visiting time. "Yes, milady, but not in person." "You're talking in riddles, Torino, and you should be aware that my head feels like it's split in two." "I'm sorry to hear that, milady. I meant the telefono." "The what?" "The telefono, milady. You may remember the disturbance when it was fitted last week." "Oh, yes, well, bring it in." "I'm afraid, milady, it is testado. How do you say it? Stillborn?" "Stubborn, Torino." She and Darrowby had honeymooned in Tuscany, and then sailed on a friend's yacht around the heel of Italy to a delightful part of Sicily, where there were no rules. She remembered finding that enthralling and scary at the same time. Later, she reflected, murderers lived in much the same way, breaking the mould yet doing everything in time-honoured fashion. She had picked up the basics of Italian on this trip, much as she always did when abroad, whatever the country. "Wait a mo, Torino. How can an inanimate object be stubborn?" To this, Torino explained that the telephone would not come to her. She had to go to it. "It's in the study, where you decided it should go, milady." Quite. She felt a little giddy on standing. That's what a knock on the head and 2 large pink gins, in that order, does to one. However, intrigued by the telephono, she made her way across the hall to the study. "Just a mo, Torino. How do I operate it?" "Semplice, milady. You hold this part to your mouth and hold the other to your ear." "Like this?" "Like that, milady. I'll be in the hall if you need me." The man could back out of a room without a sound. Once, in their misspent youth, Lord Darrowby Jones had acted as the butler in a sketch. When he tried backing off the makeshift stage they had cobbled together, he had clattered into the murderer, a vile-looking man in all black costume, and with a humpback the size of Nelson's column, and fallen into the scenery, tearing a great hole in it. Torino was a professional. You would never see him break scenery on exiting the room. Hello? Her first time into a telephone. Lady Darrowby-Jones? Came an unfamiliar voice, making her jump as if Lord Darrowby-Jones had just backed into her. This is me? She never knew whether it should be this is me or this is I, so generally alternated between her two options, this one being the turn for me. It's Jennifer Blackink. Who? I'm a reporter on the Chipping Norton Times. I wondered if I might have a chat with you. I'm bumped on the head.
As this quiet moment unfolds, let the soft music guide your thoughts into a calmer space before the story returns.
Head at the Mo, Lady Darrowby-Jones replied. Perfect. Can I pop you a few questions? It won't take but half a tick. Lady Darby-Jones, I know you're new Chief Inspector already, so it's just really to get some details for the records. Their family conversation at supper revolved around the telephone call. Not so much the subject matter, for Lady Darby-Jones couldn't remember much of it. Rather the fact that it had happened, a little like the virgin birth all over again, except in Darby instead of Bethlehem. "It's the way of the future," Lady Alice said, for once sitting down in time for the meal. "Stuff and nonsense," her father replied. "I predict a time when we all have telephones inserted into our brains as newborns. Then we can call anyone, wherever we are, and at any time, simply by thinking about their number." "Stuff and nonsense," her father repeated, the repetition making his point with force. "Would we have wires trailing around us everywhere, dear?" Lady Darby-Jones asked. "Stuff and nonsense." "And where would the operator be?" "Stuff and—" But Lord Darby-Jones wasn't allowed to finish his contribution to the debate, for there was a commotion in the hall, sounding much like a scuffle, accompanied by a crash as a large wooden double seat, heavy carved mahogany, toppled to the ground. The Darby trio rushed from small dining room to hall to see Torino lying backwards on the seat, feet waving feebly in the air, struggling to rise from his undignified position. There was a young man reknotting his tie in the large gilded mirror that hung across 2 stories of the hall. Nobody in the extended household could state with any certainty how such a large object could be fixed to the wall, such that it remained there. But it had been there for 8 or 9 generations at least. "Baritone, what are you doing here?" Surprisingly, given her earlier bump and 3 pink gins, each approximately the size of the reservoir on the hill above the house, Lady Darby-Jones was the first to recover from the shock of what seemed to be a brave attempt by Torino to keep the over-annoyed Baritone out of his house. Torino's efforts had been in vain, while Baritone adjusted his dress, albeit clumsily, in front of the mirror. "What do you think I'm doing?" the clearly inebriated Baritone replied. "This oaf had the temerity to attack me." "I meant, why are you here?" she said, at the same time going to check Torino for broken bones and finding none, just wounded pride which she soothed by selecting Lily, her pretty maid, to be the one to tend to him. "Lily, be a dear and take Torino to his pantry and get him a stiff drink, a vermouth perhaps, with a dash of gin. Make sure he's settled. Don't leave him until you're sure he is all right." "Yes, milady," she curtsied as she turned to the stricken butler. "Come on, Mr. Torino. I'm to check you over and attend to your every need until I'm sure you've not got concussion or anything nasty like that." Torino, still at a perpendicular to the rest of the population, grinned self-consciously as he accepted Lily's arm to pull him to the vertical. "As to you, Barry Baritone," Lady Alice cut into the cosy scene with an extra rapping of disdain in her voice, "we'll see you in the drawing-room immediately for an explanation." "But I haven't had my port yet," Lord Darby-Jones said, a stickler for tradition. "There are times, Daddy, when you have to make sacrifices, and this is one of them. You'll have to skip straight to your whisky nightcap, which I will pour myself, given that it is William's day off, and poor Torino looks like a ship of the line that's just had a battering from Nelson." "Well said," thought Lady Darby-Jones. "That's twice in one day I'm impressed by my dearest daughter." The explanation given by Lord Baritone was simple, and immediately drew the sympathy of all involved. "I've had the extreme indignity," he started, once escorted to the drawing-room and a glass of Lord Darby-Jones's malt thrust into his hand, "of meeting one newly arrived police detective, name of Mannering of some such." "Manners," Lady Darby-Jones corrected. "Have I offended?" "No, the dolt in question is Detective Chief Idiot Rory Rude Manners, rude in nickname and rude in nature." She was still chuckling at her own wit when she took herself to bed an hour later. In that hour, she heard some startling things about the tactics employed by the copper who had come amongst them, pushing aside the lovable haddock fisher in the process. As she left for her bed that night, she was equally impressed by 2 facts, or deductions, or whatever the correct police-speak for her thoughts were. The first is that Barry Baritone was not actually the brute she had taken him for. He had a gentle nature that wouldn't survive the first week of marriage to Lady Alice. It's just his gentility was wrapped in a veneer of aggression, mainly due to the intense bullying he received throughout his 5 years at whatever school his parents sent him to. Education had a lot to answer for. That wasn't the second observation, however. Number 2 was that Lord Baritone had the perfect alibi for the time of dear Matthew Carter's attack that led to his death. He'd sat up late in the Darrowby Arms, drinking after hours with one Sergeant Fisher, who shared his love of Highland malts. What more perfect alibi than spending time with a copper? But Alice, my dear, I distinctly heard you tell him to hand himself in when I overheard you in the shrubbery. Oh, that was nothing, Mother, although I was mad as a bear with a sore tooth at the time. He had a fit of a temper when I wouldn't let him in the front door that morning. Do you know what he did, Mother? I've no idea. She thought back to her mad dash from shrubbery of danger to house of sanctuary. She had made the steps 3 at a time, straight past. Then it came to her. He didn't, did he? Yep, guilty as charged. He had a filthy fit and threw Darrowby Duck at the door. I was on the other side of the door, thankfully, but I distinctly heard poor Dee shatter as she hit the ground. Barry Baritone, despite his temper, was innocent, well, guilty of a lesser charge. That meant it had to be his fellow guest at the Darrowby Arms, Sir John Plumer. Other than Sir John, they were fresh out of suspects, so it had to be him. Chapter 15. Morning came eventually, driving Lady Darrowby Jones to the garden in search of solace after a night spent tossing and turning, and a little cool, fresh air to soothe the ache in her head. She bumped straight into her daughter, dressed in her uniform of jodhpurs, but without a hat and whip, as if her routine of an early morning ride had been rudely interrupted. Which it had, the details of which she excitedly babbled to her mother. "Slow down, Alice dear. I can't take it all in at a rate of 60 words a minute." "Don't you see, Mother?" Lady Darrowby Jones did not see, saw nothing that misty, heavy morning, so Lady Alice took a deep breath and slowed considerably, output more like 30 a minute. As one talked and the other took it in, they fell in together, resuming Lady Darrowby Jones's circuit of the house. They rounded the shrubbery, sluggery to the right, the current subject matter of their discussion, the east wing, to the left. "You mean—" Lady Darrowby Jones could barely comprehend what she was hearing. "Exactly," Lady Alice replied excitedly. "I took Mr. Burrows some rations this morning and—" "What did you take him?" That was the mother coming out in Lady Darrowby Jones. Her daughter looked irritable at the distraction and whisked through a list. "Anything I could find that didn't require cooking. Caviar, marmalade, an apple pie, a loaf of bread put out for the ducks, and, 3 bottles of champagne. The point is not what I took in, but what I found once there, Mother." "No protein, my dear. Unless caviar has some, I wouldn't know. Perhaps next time you could take some cold meat. There's always plenty to find around the larders." "If it's protein he needs, I'll take him a bowl of Daddy's slugs." "Don't do that, dear. Not with the symposium hard upon us. Your father is already in mourning." "For Matthew?" "Yes, they got close in the trenches during the war. They were at Ypres together, as well as the Somme. But not just Matthew, he's also in black for Darrowby Duck, who has lived on the front doorstep for hundreds of years and now gone. Poof, in a fit of temper." "Lord Baritone has a lot to answer for," Alice replied. "But he's not our killer. Now, if you'll allow me to continue, I think I might have a pretty significant clue for you." The promise of a clue put a stop to Lady Darrowby Jones's chatter. It also focused her mind like sunlight through a keyhole. "So, let me get this straight," she said, as their travels took them around the back of the east wing to the kitchen gardens. Beyond that lay the orchard and the fruit garden, then a quaint rose garden planted by Darrowby's mother, past the lawns at the west of the house, and back eventually to the drive at the front. You couldn't find Alfie when you took him that delectable stack of nourishment. You wandered around and eventually found him in the old ballroom. That's right, Mother. And the ballroom was stacked full of treasure. Treasure? Lady Darrowby Jones had found this hard to take in the first time around. Pirates didn't operate in rural northwest Oxfordshire. Well, treasure-like objects, paintings, tapestries, furniture, silver, jewellery, you name it. Where did they come from? Lady Darrowby Jones asked, but not meaning it to be answered by her daughter, more of a placer while she worked through the options in her mind. It's obviously connected with young Alfie's hearing of suspicious noises, first in the Dowager House and then in the East Wing. They have to be illicit goods, otherwise why hide them? They're the hauls from country house robberies, that's what I think. Alice put her thoughts out to her mother. Yes, I agree, my dear, but the question becomes, first, why hide them here with us, and second, once hidden, why move them from one hidey-hole to the other? The answer to this question eluded them. They made a second circuit, even started a third, but no solution entered either mind. Lady Darrowby Jones commented that this was the nature of a mystery. Put simply, we just don't know, my dear. They might still have been circuiting the house at lunchtime, had not a police car rattled up the drive. They were at the back of the house, in the middle of circuit number 3, so they cut through the gun room and the billiards room and came out of the front door just as DCI Manners was yanking the bell cord for a 5th or 6th time. "Good morning, DCI Manners," Lady Darrowby Jones exclaimed, while Alice put on her particularly haughty face, involving the pitch of her head to be just right, so she could look down her long, thin nose towards whoever was upsetting the apple cart. "Good morning, Lady Darrowby Jones. Good morning, Lady Alice. It's a fine day for it." Lady Darrowby Jones remembered thinking the Chief Inspector did what so many did with great irritation arising. He introduced a he, she, it word, without first saying who or what he, she, or it was. She was about to point out the failings of Manners' diction when he burst out with great excitement. "It's a fine day, ladies," he repeated himself. Ouch, thought Lady Darrowby Jones. Ladies as a collective noun didn't even start to work in her book. "Yes, we have a murderer firmly in our grasp, locked up at this very moment. Who do you have?" They turned to see Lord Darrowby Jones, back at his customary top-of-the-steps place, frowning briefly at the pedestal where Darrowby Duck had stood for countless centuries. "Why, Professor Plumer, of course, the little snivelling rat. He did it to get back at you. He did no such thing." "What?" If you've ever seen a motor car slam on its brakes, that's exactly how DCI Manners appeared at that moment. From sailing down the open road, he turned the corner, saw an obstacle in the road, in the form of one rather tubby lord of the land, and applied all his foot power to slide his vehicle to a halt. "Sir John and I have had a disagreement, Chief Inspector, but the man's so gentle he wouldn't even dissect a slug. You can't get a gentler bod than Sir John. But me no buts, Chief Inspector. I've known the man for over 20 years. In that time, we've had dozens of disagreements. Each time he goes off in a sulk and comes back a day, a week, or a month later, as the tiff never happened at all." DCI Manners had quite a few more buts to issue, but felt obliged to follow Lord Darrowby Jones's instruction in that regard. Instead, he stood at the bottom of the steps, opening and closing his mouth, as if saying his buts one after the other, but without committing to sounding them out. Behind him, his car door stood open, where he had left it in his triumphant rush to announce case solved once and for all, his first murder case in command after 24 years on the force. Eventually, the reality of the situation spread across his features. The silent buts diminished in their frequency, and then stopped altogether, crimson rising from his neck like a new sunrise, as he realised that he was the centre of attention, with the wide drive as the stage, and his motor car his only prop. A moment longer, and his only thought was his getaway. He mumbled something unintelligible, and moved back towards the car, banging his back on the open door, adjusting his angle to make for the safety of the seat. A moment after that, his car was moving down the drive at the bottom of which he would turn right and head for the police station. Somebody would pay for his embarrassment, but who, he asked himself, would that unfortunate be? The glum features of Sergeant Haddock Fisher came to mind, a mind that was now made up. Chapter 16. The story was on the front page. Unfortunately, DCI Manners had the Chipping Norton Times delivered to his house in Parfait Manor each morning. It accompanied his eggs and bacon with toast, tomatoes and mushrooms included. He opened up the paper, and the headline screamed right at him. Manners can't manage. Latest addition to the Darrowby force allows murderer to walk away. Literally. It's been reliably reported to this newspaper by an impeccable and well-informed source that Detective Chief Inspector Rory Manners, newly arrived at Darrowby Police Station from the big city of Oxford, following the tragic murder of war hero Matthew Carter, established himself in the station and quickly came up with a suspect, one Alfred Burrows, also a new appointment to the area, in his case to Darrowby Hall, where Burrows was offered the position of secretary to Lord Darrowby Jones. Young Burrows had barely worked his way into this important job as the right-hand man in the run-up to Lord Darrowby Jones's fantastic effort to host the Slug Symposium at Darrowby Hall next month, when he found himself snatched by the ever-efficient long arms of the law. Only, perhaps, they weren't so efficient after all. Yes, they questioned the suspect, gathering enough information to arrest and charge him. From there, say you, dear reader, it should have been a straightforward matter of appearing before the local magistrate, followed by remand in Oxford prison to await trial. It should have been, but it didn't work out that way. Manners left the long-serving and noble Sergeant Fisher on sole guard duty 2 nights ago, while he went off in his car for the evening, no doubt having a sumptuous supper, while others took up the slack. "Sir?" His housekeeper's voice broke through the wall of fuzz he felt around him. "Sir, your car is here to pick you up." As well as DCI Manners' housekeeper, Mrs. Dover worked part-time at Darrowby Hall cleaning the silver. Being quite possibly the biggest gossip in Darrowby, she was hardly suited to her role of supporting the policeman in his domestic comforts. The moment the Chief Inspector left his rose-covered cottage in the next-door village of Parfait Manor, she put on her hat, closed the windows and doors, and made her way up to Darrowby Hall, which sat on Darrowby Hill, looking like a sheepdog watching over its charges below. That's how, through Lily, who could almost match the gossipability of Mrs. Dover, Lady Darrowby Jones discovered about the Chief Inspector's dismay and disgust at the power of the press, even out in the deepest depths of Oxfordshire. "From what I heard, milady, he's one mighty upset plod, so to speak." "Does the newspaper say anything about the reporter's sources?" "No, milady." Lady Darrowby Jones was just about to sigh in relief when Lily added that the reporter had no need to mention her sources because "everybody knows you were the source, milady, almost as soon as you put that telephone down." When in doubt, walk it out. That had been old Jonesy's saying, one of the more common of his many. Lady Darrowby Jones's father had been unrefined, slightly boorish, ignorant of matters other than letting ladies sit and opening the door for them, yet a brilliant businessman with a fine mind and an astute eye for observation. He was the cause of Lady Darrowby Jones's generally happy, or at least content, life, where responsibility was the angostura, while pleasantness was the gin. A little responsibility made her life shine, and she would always thank her daddy for setting her up in marriage to an aristocrat, and then for leaving her his entire fortune. And thanks were due for the selection of her dear husband from the list of suitors and fortune hunters. Now, as she sat looking at the disaster the mystery of the polite man had become, seemingly just hours after triumph had reigned supreme, with 2 suspects to occupy her mind, she recalled his expression about walking out your doubt. And that's what she went to do. Endless circuits of the house, as if trying to create a new footpath in one morning. She didn't walk alone, however. Lily chased after her with a light coat, for it looked like rain. She ended up doing the first 2 rounds until Lord Darrowby Jones took over. Even Lady Alice took a turn, swiping with her whip at anything that dared grow above knee level. "The trouble is," she said often, and without regard to who trod the ground with her at that particular time, "that we're back to square one in the mystery of the polite man." It occurred to her, somewhere around the 5th Circuit, Darrowby in attendance, that the cross-patched DCI Manners, A, now had cause to be cross, B, that crossness would be directed right at her, and C, Manners was in exactly the same position as everyone else, lacking a suspect. "Much as I dislike Barry Baritone," she said, not for the first time, "he's clearly innocent of any crime." "Other than being obnoxious and going hell-bent for our daughter," Darrowby interjected, before adding, "and of course the wanton destruction of Darrowby Duck." "Yes, quite. It seems Sir John can't be included in the listing of the world's most heinous criminals either." "Not unless there are 2 Sir John Plumers with vastly differing personalities. You must have realised that, dear. I've had countless fallouts with Johnny Plumer over the years, yet remain working together. I know he wouldn't hurt a fly." Round the west wing and across the back of the house, with silence prevailing. "What of young Burrows?" Lord Darrowby Jones asked, eventually. "Another fly advocate, without a shadow of a doubt," she replied immediately. "As in not hurting a fly," she added, in case Darrowby took her words to be a reference to the trout that abounded in the river that ran through their estate. "Where is he now?" he asked, showing that, despite his air of being engrossed in the world of slugs, he knew that his family had been complicit in Alfie's rescue from the depths of the Darrowby dungeons, as the urchins who attended Darrowby School referred to the police station. That's when Lady Darrowby Jones remembered the conversation with her daughter about the East Wing. Suddenly, life was looking up. The case had wheels and wings, and was capable of taking off. At that moment, as if drawn by familial duty, Lady Alice came from a side door and fell in with the marching party. The 3 Darrowby Jones family members beat their path together for the last few circuits of Darrowby Hall, while inside the house, their staff beat off a concerted attack from the boys in blue. Well, one particular member of the force being DCI Manners. "I'm here to see Lady Darrowby Jones." "Who shall I say is calling, sir?" That was Torino's way of dropping a little unsettledness into the attack on his Darrowby employers. He knew full well who the angry plod was. "DCI Manners, of course, you—" He stopped at that. Even a middle-class police detective knew that if you insulted the butler, all hell would fall around your ears. Plus, there was the added complication that this butler was foreign, therefore bound to be temperamental. "If you would be so kind as to step this way, sir, I'll see if Lady Darrowby Jones can be located." Torino led the way to a room that wasn't much bigger than a walk-in cupboard, rumoured to be the room used to confine the 7th Lord Darrowby many years earlier. He had been stark raving mad, actually trying to pull the house down 1 stone at a time. How their lives would be different now if the 7th of the species had succeeded in his objective. That same 7th, she recalled, had also been the occupant who, in earlier and happier days, had commissioned Darrowby Duck, wanting a friend who wouldn't tell him what to think and say. Torino hastened across the lawn to the Darrowby party, apologised for the intrusion, explained the situation with regard to the invasion of the hall, and sought instructions as to what to do next. "Well, tell the blighter to get lost," was Lady Alice's contribution from the younger generation. "No, hold him up. Send Lillian to ask if he needs refreshment, while you continue to locate us. She'll keep him tied up for hours with that tongue of hers." So it was that the power of the spoken word, most specifically in the form of Lady Darrowby Jones's lady's maid, saw off the forces of law and order in a relentless verbal grinding down of resources until an exhausted Manners left 90 minutes later, leaving the Darrowby trio free to plot their next move in the mystery of the polite man. Chapter 17. There's something about a crumbling building that maximizes fear, not just the thought that everything could soon tumble down around you like Pompeii in ancient times, perhaps covering Lady Darby-Jones and her daughter in rubble for later generations to discover, but also a creepiness that means derelict buildings feature high in novelists' choice of places to invoke suspense and terror. It was nonsensical to feel such fear, as Lady Darby-Jones said several times to her daughter, pointing out that she had spent half her life in the proximity of the ruined East Wing, while Alice had spent her whole life. "Not true, Mother. You're forgetting you sent me away to boarding school." "For a matter of weeks, my dear." "And there's the house in the Highlands. We often spent summers there." It was true, but Lady Darby-Jones kept affirming in a loud voice that Alice had spent the largest proportion of her life in the vicinity of Darby Hall. Perhaps raising her voice gave her the courage of a couple of pink gins, for it was eerie, going from room to room, hearing creaks and groans as timber and plaster settled in their perpetual decline. "Did you tell Alfie where to go, dear?" Lady Darby-Jones checked with Alice as they approached the ballroom. "Yes, of course, Mother. I'm not completely—" "Hush!" Lady Darby-Jones stopped so suddenly that Lady Alice bumped into her back. Fortunately, the physics worked out in both their favours, the mass and inertia of the mother being more than the mass and momentum of the daughter. No real damage done. But they had both heard the sound of human footsteps. They stood together like a classical statue, except they were fully clothed, whereas most sculptures she had seen boasted scantily clad figures. The footsteps gradually approached their exposed position. "Oh, there you are!" came the youthful voice of Elfie. "I thought you were never coming." "We're busybods, Mr. Burrows," Alice replied with an unnecessary level of acerbity. Lady Darby-Jones noticed rising scarlet from her neck, but then mothers noticed these things and tucked them away for future reference. "Welcome to our home again, Alfie, although not quite the condition of the rest of the house." Lady Darby-Jones's greeting, by contrast, lacked any venom. "Would you like to explore the delightful Aladdin's Cave that is the east wing of Darby Hall?" Alfie seemed as one would expect for anybody left entirely alone for 48 hours, except there was something else to his mood, as if he was dressing up his behaviour in some way. Puzzling. Then it came to her. Alice had supplied what she saw as the essentials to eat and drink, copious amounts of caviar on the one hand, bottles of champagne on the other. Horses drank water, humans drank champagne, or pink gins if that was your fancy, but water was to wash in, or to add to venison stew. Alfie Burrows was tiddly. Who wouldn't be, with a daily supply of 3 or more bottles of the finest? In fact, it was remarkable that he wasn't rolling around the floor or singing bawdy songs about fat mummers and cheating lovers. Alfie's description, however, was spot on. Whether inspired by the drink or coming from natural poetic flair, the ballroom was stacked up with valuables as if fine furniture, classic jewellery, and the best silver plate in the country were going out of fashion. Someone, somewhere, no doubt those beasts up in Whitehall, had selected the east wing of Darby Hall to be the depository of the grandest treasures of the land. That thought, as she descended the stairs to the ballroom, made her think of the requisition of her home during the war, the time the ballroom had last been used, when they gave a grand ball for all the soldier patients at the hastily converted recovery home that Darby Hall had become. Happy memories flooded back. Lady Alice had been a relatively sweet-tempered, full-of-joy 10-year-old when the house was taken over, and soldiers had flooded the place with their bright banter and cheeky ways. That was when Matthew Carter had come home. Only no banter from him. Nothing for 8 years, until he muttered repeatedly, "Polite man," before his final departure. What could he have meant with reference to politeness? One feature of rural Oxfordshire life that Lady Darby-Jones adored was the social circle. Some of it was a bore, but mostly it consisted of round after round of parties and suppers with the same group of pleasant people. Having been accepted into that circle early on, despite her coal miner's daughter heritage, she found the people mostly pleasant, if sometimes a little dull. What you gained in geniality you sacrificed in spark. That meant Lady Darby-Jones had, after 20-odd years on the circuit, a reasonable appreciation for the collectibles others had in their country homes. At first, she thought the similarity with the objects stacked throughout the ballroom was coincidence, but that didn't last long. "That must be Colonel Musgrove's silver dish," she exclaimed, it dawning on her that the cream of the crop in a 10-mile radius in all directions was stashed away in her ballroom. "And that is Lady Blessom's necklace, or I'm a washerwoman." She turned at the end of a long pile of paintings, faced the two representatives of the younger generation, and pronounced in solemn tones that these all seemed to be stolen property from their neighbours. "The problem is," Alfie replied, "what do we do about it? I mean, Lady Darby-Jones, we're going to look like wholesale burglars if this comes to light." "Yes, Alfie, the scandal." She imagined the chipping Norton Times chipping in headlines like "Lord and Lady Lightfingers," or "How the rich just keep getting richer." "We need a plan," she said, placing her ample bottom on a Chippendale chair she swore she last sat on in old Jerry Ford Maddox's house during a delightful supper party that got a little out of hand. But no plan came to them. To be fair, Alfie might have been a little too far gone for serious plans. Instead, he opened his lungs and started bellowing some dreadful song until Lady Alice hit him with a cushion, covered in a George III needlework depiction of a medieval hunting scene. Several clocks chimed the hour. There seemed to be clocks everywhere. "I think, young man, you need some coffee. Alice, dear, would you make a pot and bring it in?" "That means going the long way around to the kitchens and back," she groaned, while also managing to glare at Alfie. He grinned back and made to start in song again. "It's lunchtime, so I'll make your excuses to your father," Lady Darby-Jones said. "We'll have some lunch and turn our minds over on the problem of what to do, while Alfie tries to land himself in Sobertown. We'll see you later, Alfie, my boy. Try and balance the champagne with the coffee Lady Alice will bring you. It does no good to have a third of our team incapacitated. Alice, I'll see you in the dining room. Don't dally now. You know how much your father likes his meals on time." "Yes, Mother." With that, Lady Darby-Jones made her way back across the ballroom and out into the wide passage that ran the length of the east wing. She would be back in the dining room in no time. It was game stew for lunch, one of Mrs. Stone's gems. Lady Darby-Jones had a plan to make a plan. The only problem with that plan to make a plan was that the plan failed. The first one, that is. It failed because Alice didn't turn up at all for lunch. Lady Darby-Jones kept her husband waiting 10 minutes, but could not make him wait any longer. Her own stomach was rumbling at the thought of game stew. So at 25 minutes past 1, they tucked in. "We can't wait any longer, dear," Lord Darby-Jones said, tapping his knife on the tabletop like a rebellious schoolboy. "We have the meeting this afternoon." "The meeting?" "Yes, with the caterers, don't you recall? For the symposium, of course." Clearly, a staff of 50 was not enough to cater for a mere symposium of slug-lovers. Lord Darby-Jones expected them to come in their hundreds, thousands even. "Can we rearrange, dear? I have something rather important on this afternoon." "My dear, we rearranged the first date and then rearranged the second, and so on. This is the 5th time for this meeting. No, I'm putting my foot down on this one. It's to be today, and there's no dissuading me on that front." Very occasionally, Lady Darby-Jones gave way to her husband. Once a year was the running average. In return, he gave way to her on the other days. She knew she was on to a good thing, but his symposium was precious. She would have to go through the motions of discussing canopies and sugary cakes for several hours before she could turn her attention back to her vital planning. It completely went out of her mind that Lady Alice had not turned up at all for lunch. She was often late, forgetting time as soon as she swung into the saddle, so the pair of them often ate alone. She would chase her daughter up a little later on. Except, events rather overtook them all. Chapter 18. "Can you handle the departures, dear?" Lady Darby-Jones whispered to her husband at 5:45 in the evening, 15 minutes from drinks time. Yes, if you need to get off, dear." Truth be known, he had had his fill of salmon fillings and sautéed somethings or other. Pending 6 o'clock was beckoning him too. Except, this time with Lady Darrowby Jones, it was nothing to do with pink gins, nor any other colour of liquid refreshment. She felt an urgent need to get back to the East Wing. There had been no sign of Alice that afternoon. That wasn't surprising. She would normally keep well out of the way for something as tedious as a catering visit. Yet, Lady Darrowby Jones had a sense of foreboding that increased with every step after she slipped through the side door into the East Wing. Call it mother's instinct, but she just knew everything was not quite right. And with good cause. "Alice," she called. "Alfie?" No reply. She wasted precious seconds considering that if Alice and Alfie ever wed, they would have the same initials, A.B., the start of the alphabet. Then a few more seconds, forcing herself to admire a landscape propped against the wall of the ballroom. Where had she seen that before? She knew she had to move on, yet something dragged her back, gripping her so each step forward was a struggle. As long as you don't know something terrible has happened, there's hope that it hasn't. Yet when she saw it, it wasn't as bad as all that. There was blood, but not copious amounts, barely enough for a half-decent crime scene. 2 bodies were sitting up, side by side on the ballroom floor, rubbing their heads. "Are you all right?" Now that she knew, she could react with speed. It's just the not knowing that stops time in its tracks. "Yes, Mother. We just decided to tie ourselves up for the fun of it." Lady Darrowby Jones looked more closely and saw both Alice and Alfie had their feet bound tightly in curtain cord. The floor contained evidence that they had also had their hands tied. Broken cord, blood splatters, and green bits of broken glass, a champagne bottle. Also spilled coffee and a silver coffee pot lying on the floor. "You're really all right?" "Yes, we are." Something in her mother's tone made Alice answer in serious mode. "What on earth?" "We don't know," Alice replied, shaking her head and still feeling for bumps. Lady Darrowby Jones took over that duty for her, giving her head a thorough check-up, followed by the same for Alfie. "No sign of lasting damage, dears. Now, tell me what you know." "All I know," Alfie started out, "is I heard someone moving about. I was over there." He pointed towards a stack of paintings. "I decided to spend my time cataloguing the items. I devised a system which I think you'll approve of, Lady Darrowby Jones." "Oh, Mr. Burrows, get on with the story, if you will," Alice interrupted, not caring one jot for catalogues and systems. "Yes, well, perhaps later I'll go into the catalogue system I've devised. Now, I was bending over that portrait of the fat man over there, and I heard footsteps. Naturally, I imagined it was Lady Alice returning with the promised coffee. I turned, relishing a strong coffee, and the next thing was a sensation of it being someone much heavier than Lady Alice. He or she struck me on the head, right here." He pointed to the lower back part of his head, where his hair petered out. "The next thing I knew was Lady Alice here, scrabbling around to get free of her own binds." It was time for Lady Alice to take up the story. She started by explaining that she had come back to the ballroom, making good time, and carrying a large silver coffee pot. "I saw Mr. Burrows's legs sticking out behind the paintings, and imagined he had keeled over from too much champers. I put the coffee pot down and gave him a kick. No, it wasn't too hard at all, more a sort of playful kick to get a reaction. Well, no reaction was forthcoming, so I kicked again. Then I thought he must have woken up, for someone kicked me with force and swept me off my feet. I would never— No, I know that now, for you'd get a mighty big kick straight back again. Well, just like Mr. Burrows, it all went black. Yet I woke up first." That last comment was said with pride. "She woke up and did a brilliant thing," Alfie continued the tale. "We were both bound and gagged, trussed up like trussed-up things, yet it was Lady Alice who came up with the plan. She knocked the table leg with her body until that bottle of champagne toppled off, and then she shuffled around the other way and used the broken shard of glass to cut her ropes." "It wasn't easy," Alice put in, wanting maximum recognition, which she quickly got. demonstrating that Lady Darrowby-Jones was a true softy at heart. "That's where the blood comes from," Alfie continued. "It's all hers, every drop of it. I got a big bump on my head, but she got her own bump and spilled some blood too. Very commendable, Alice dear." Lady Darrowby-Jones didn't know what else to say. Her daughter was a quick-thinking girl of action, good work and all that. "Did you see who?" She got two shaking heads in response. Neither had seen other than a shadowy figure in the corner of their vision. "Well, who on earth could it be?" she asked, then adding that if they found out who had bumped them on the head and ripped the curtain cords down to bind them tightly, they would, in all probability, have their murderer. "The big problem is that we don't have a single suspect," she concluded gloomily. Then the germ of an idea crept into her mind. She took charge at that moment. "Alice, open another bottle of champagne. Here, we'll use the glasses I swear come from Glossop's." Glossop's was a house situated at the other end of the valley. Darrowby on the hill to the north, Glossop's on another hill to the south. They stared at each other across their estates, and the Darrowby-Joneses were good friends with the Bryce family, who had occupied Glossop since the reign of King Stephen. "Alfie, get your pen and paper, and we'll do some lists. Right, we'll make a start." Lady Darrowby-Jones's approach was simple. She had Alfie write down every single adult name they could think of in the village, both resident or visitor. Most came from Lady Alice and herself, Alfie being a newbie. They ended up with a list across 4 pages of Alfie's notebook, even though Alfie had very small, very neat handwriting. "Stage 2, she said, "is to rule out the obvious non-murderers. We can strike out the elderly." That statement diverted them for a 10-minute discussion on where one crossed from middle-aged to elderly. Lady Alice claimed, quite fantastically, that being old started at 21. They settled on 70, when Alice pointed out that if they didn't make up their minds pretty soon, they'd all be old before they reached stage 3. Subsequent stages meant the whittling down process developed and continued. By stage 4, they had the list down to the equivalent of 1 page, with 3/4 of the names crossed off. Alice started complaining that Alfie was taking too long to go through the pages to look for a name. "Fine," he said. "Give me 10 minutes and I'll make a new list. I'll put it in alphabetical order so the next stages can be quick and easy." "You've got 5 minutes, Mr. Burrows," Alice countered with. "So don't waste any time talking about what you're going to do." Again, Lady Darrowby-Jones spotted signs of something behind her rudeness. Not visible to most of the population. A maternal instinct, no doubt. "Right," said Alfie a short while later, somewhere around the 6-minute mark. "We now have 48 names remaining on the list. If we can whittle that down a bit more, I think we'll know who killed Matthew Carter." But the final 48 took longer than anticipated, all the obvious ones having given up the ghost a while back. The multitude of clocks in the ballroom showed the steady, relentless passage of time, a march towards supper time, always set for 8 p.m. By 7:30, they had taken another 14 names off the list, leaving 2 rugger teams with a couple of reserves on each side. "We still have to get change for the evening," Lady Darrowby-Jones said. "Daddy would never notice," Alice replied, making a good point. "Yes, but the servants would." Lady Darrowby-Jones's return point was even more valid. "We'll have to risk a delay. Whoever knocked you both on the head and tied you up won't come back until it's dark." Lady Darrowby-Jones stood up to leave with Alice. "I've got a plan forming, Alfie. Lady Alice and I will be back as soon as Lord Darrowby-Jones goes back to his slugs. Until then, I'm rather afraid you're on your own." "That's all right, Lady Darrowby-Jones. I believe I have 1 last bottle of champagne to keep me company. Seriously, if you have a plan forming, I have faith it will be a good one." As Lady Darrowby-Jones and Lady Alice left the East Wing and headed for their bedrooms to change for the evening, Lady Darrowby-Jones just hoped the plan that was forming would be good enough to outwit their opponent, whoever he was. Chapter 19. They say the thing that makes a general win battles is flexibility. You can have the best set of plans in the world, but you must allow for the moves of the enemy, however sneaky and roundabout they are. What's more, The best generals have to stay with their ear to the ground, while simultaneously sitting tall in the saddle to observe every action across the field. That's a hard feat to achieve, but Lady Darrowby-Jones managed it somehow. Supper seemed to spin out forever. Lady Darrowby-Jones had reasoned that, with the caterer's visit that afternoon, there was every chance that Darrowby would be so engrossed in all things slug that he would be rushing back to the library to continue his work. He was engrossed, but it took a form she had not anticipated. Yes, slugs filled every part of the space between his ears, yet he seemed in expansive, chatty mood, rather than withdrawn and absorbed as she had expected. Consequently, plan alteration number 1 involved throwing herself into the world of slugs with a level of enthusiasm she did not feel. Good Lord, there was a murderer around, quite possibly lurking in the East Wing at this very moment. They had left poor Alfie there with nothing more than a bottle of Dutch courage to reinforce him. Who on the list could it be? She had got Alfie to write out 2 quick copies, one for herself and one for Alice. Just so we can think about the names and see if anything pops up. "Don't you agree, dear?" Darrowby was talking to her, expecting an answer. "Repeat the question. There's a dear. It's been a long day with the caterers and everything." "Oh, my dear, I'm sorry. I'm wittering on when you're feeling quite the exhausted person." "No, I'd like to listen, dear." She meant that sentiment. Despite her pressing enquiries in regards to the mystery of the polite man, she loved her husband in a very English way that involved supporting him and being by his side, come what may. "I was just saying about classification of slugs being a major theme at the symposium, dear. What do you think of the idea?" "Brilliant, spectacular, just the perfect idea." "You really think so?" But Lady Darrowby-Jones's mind was off again, in another direction altogether. Darrowby did not pursue the subject, seemingly content with her endorsement. Never mind that it was actually applied to the mystery, and not to his symposium planning. His mention of classification had set her mind in motion. She looked down at her copy of the list, partially hidden under her napkin on her lap. What if she classified them according to, say, their occupation? Using her eyebrow pencil, she rapidly decided on a classification system according to how each name of the list earned their living. Soon, she discovered a remarkable thing. 10 of the 34 remaining on the list were connected to the police. 2 were the cleaners of the police station. A third was Mrs. Dover, who came to polish the silver at Darrowby Hall twice a week, bringing every piece of gossip imaginable on each occurrence. Then there was Mrs. Monaghan, who came in and typed in the mornings. She had an elderly mother who she looked after, as well as 3 growing sons. She couldn't imagine any of these ladies wielding heavy objects at individuals. She did some quick mental arithmetic. 10 take away 4, left 6. The other 6 were Manners, Fisher, Hoosish, and 3 other constables. Suddenly, this general had a plan for a counterattack in the mystery of the polite man. Polite man. Polite man. What if poor Matthew hadn't been saying polite man at all? Rather, it had been policeman. Matthew had been attacked and murdered by a policeman. But surely not. She thought about the charming, helpful young policeman she had gone to the Dowager House with. Hoosish? What was that, dear? Hoosish? Why mention that name after all these years? Her husband asked, looking perplexed. There was an unhappy story there, and suddenly she remembered it. Tell me again what happened with Hoosish, dear. Well, if you must, but I would rather talk about... Something in his wife's face made him take up his recently refilled wine glass and relate the connection between the 2 families. Mrs. Hoosish was once Tilly Miller, a pretty young thing back in the day. She's still quite an attractive girl. Well, this story all relates to my twin brother. He was born first and would have inherited had he remained alive. Sadly, he died at Mather King 24 years ago. He had a tryst with Tilly Hoosish, née Miller, before she got married. She got hitched pretty soon afterwards. If I remember correctly, largely because of a certain bump growing in her tum. Frank Hoosish, the elder, was a gentle soul, salt of the earth. He took the unborn child as his own and loved the blighter dearly, even calling him Frank. Actually, I find the son to be a rather fine fellow. I put him forward for the police when he turned 18, although Fisher told me recently that he's hardly suited to the force. Apparently his nickname is frankly useless. Yes, go on, dear. Well, there's not much else to say. My brother was a bit on the wild side, centre of every gathering, that sort of thing. Well, Father wasn't too pleased to hear about the offspring issue, and sent Bro off to the army. He died a true hero, you know. Sad. So sad. Thank you, dear. Now you must get back to your slugs. You'll never be ready for the symposium otherwise. No, Alice and I will be fine alone tonight. We have things to do. As they left the table, Lady Darrowby-Jones whispered to her daughter that she thought they had their man. Yes, I rather gathered when you mentioned Hoosish. Odd fellow, I must say. But do you really think he's our murderer? Well, there's a case to build, but I rather think he is. Come, Alice, my dear. We've got a plan to put into action. They made it back to the ballroom just in time. Frank Hoosish leant over an inert body, lying between the table and the stack of paintings. He had a knife in his hand. That knife was raised high. Alice and her mother instinctively went for him, in a combined action that you couldn't choreograph for the moving pictures if you had 100 takes. Lady Darrowby-Jones went low, while Lady Alice went high. There was a split-second difference in their timing, such that Alice nudged the knife-carrying hand, just as it plunged down towards Alfie Burrows, just before Lady Darrowby-Jones hit hard with a flying rugger tackle that put Frank Hoosish, dazed and confused, halfway across the ballroom, slumped up against a Queen Anne sideboard. Lady Darrowby-Jones was convinced belonged to Sir Freddie Knoll, quite possibly the wealthiest landowner in these parts. Lady Darrowby-Jones, being at ground level, naturally looked towards Alfie, confirming a half-moment later that he lived. Alice, being much higher up to start with, continued her self-trajectory on across the ballroom, finally sliding to a stop at the point where Frank Hoosish lay. This brat's still breathing too. Much the pity. Could have saved the hangman a job, Alice cried on hearing the confirmation of life within Alfie. Get off me, you big... Alice, on hearing this, clamped whatever came to hand over Frank Hoosish's mouth, this being a rolled map of medieval England. Careful, Alice, dear. Whatever that is, it will be of considerable value. Needs must, mother. Needs must. Lady Darrowby-Jones, having checked no loss of life or broken bones, kept her mind on the practical. Rolling off Alfie where she had landed, she asked him to double over to the telephone and call DCI Manners. Tell him we've landed a fish, and it's not what anybody expected. Will do, Lady Darrowby-Jones, he replied, scrabbling to his feet and dashing out. No, it's quicker that way, she called after him, pointing back along the broad corridor. Chop, chop now. I don't know how long Lady Alice can hold the beast down. It was touch and go. P.C. Hoosish, bizarrely in uniform, struggled against Alice, seeing this as his opportunity to get away. Any opportunity for escape was better than prison and the hangman. Lady Darrowby-Jones settled the matter by positioning her not inconsiderable weight on his legs, effectively pinning him to the floor, until they heard the tingle of the police cars racing up the drive. Chapter 20. Darrowby Hall buzzed with excitement. Today was the third and final day of the International Slug Symposium, co-hosted by Lord Darrowby-Jones and his long-time friend and associate, Professor Sir John Plumer, both in their element, both beaming as the crowds streamed in. It seemed the public were anxious to find out all about the European red, the leopard slug, a fancy name Lady Darrowby-Jones picked up, for the common garden variety, or the yellow, grey or black of the species. It had been Alfie's suggestion to put half an army of brooms through the east wing and use that as the centre of the display. The ballroom, although long past its best, made a serviceable conference room, where speaker after speaker gave speech after speech, from 11 in the morning until 7 in the evening. I never knew there was so much to know about slugs, Alfie said, whether from enthusiasm or politeness, Lady Darrowby-Jones couldn't be sure. The only person not caught up in the symposium was Lady Alice. She went off camping on horseback for the weekend, saying in a loud voice that slugs weren't her scene. She rode Winston, a grey and white stallion of 16 hands, while trailing Flint behind her, loaded with a tent, some cold meat, a basket of plums, a change of clothes, and a bar of chocolate. Oh, and 3 bottles of champagne wrapped in Flint's night blanket. Lady Alice had little interest, but this was more than made up for by the surprise involvement of DCI Rude Manners, a slug enthusiast, despite being a keen gardener. "What's the latest, DCI Manners?" Lady Darrowby Jones asked when she bumped into him at the symposium. "Oh, it's a talk on how to manage slugs as a farmer. I must move along. It starts in 10 minutes. "No, I meant with regard to the case." She meant the mystery of the polite man, as she liked to think of it. "Oh, that! All done and dusted, except Hoosish is still on the loose, isn't he? Yes, but the ports are being watched, and his photograph is in every police station in the country. We'll get him soon enough, see if we don't. Now, if you'll excuse me, Lady Darrowby Jones, I have quite an interest in the next topic. My brother is a farmer, you see, over towards Bryce Norton." She let him go to his treasured talk, wondering where Frank Hoosish would turn up next. In the 3 weeks since they had collared him in the ballroom, the killer had escaped 3 times and had been recaptured twice, hence free at the moment with a price on his head. The devil had actually escaped that very evening of his first capture. Lady Darrowby Jones had handed him over to the authorities. After waiting half an hour for their vans to trundle the way up the drive, he had slipped away when they were deciding which van to put him in. Still in the uniform of a constable, it had been easy for him to mix with a dozen or more trampling all over her roses with their 2 big boots. Why did policemen always have big feet? Was it a requirement of the job? Only size 10s and over need apply? They had caught the blighter getting into the driver's seat of the detective inspector's vehicle. She admired the cheek, just like she thought she understood his reasons for his actions. On the evening in question, the big night for the mystery, not the climax of the symposium, Elfie had run to call the police on the newly installed telephone. That left Lady Darrowby Jones and Alice perched on the lithe and strong body of PC Frankly Useless, except he had proved himself a highly capable criminal and escape artist. "Why did you do these awful things?" Alice started the interrogation. "If you shift your weight so I can talk, I'll tell you." "I'm not falling for that one, laddie. You might as well tell, because it's all going to come out before the judge anyway." So the murderer and arch-burglar had talked, preferring to do so in front of amateur sleuths rather than his fellow boys in blue. "It's because of what your husband did, Lady Darrowby Jones." She noted, even a criminal like Hoosish knew the correct way to address a lady. Some things never change, and nor should they. "Why? What on earth has he done?" "Only disowned his own son." Those words hit the 2 ladies on a rebound. They held Hoosish in an iron grip, face close to the polished marble floor, taking no risks. His voice hit the marble and came back up with an eerie quality to it, a little like a child's toy that distorts the voice of those talking. The explanation for his actions hit them much harder. Frank Hoosish had clearly been under the illusion that Lord Darrowby Jones had been his father. "Don't you realise it was his twin brother?" "What?" Now the voice had the strain of pending realisation to it. "Your father was the Honourable Harold Darrowby, heir to the Darrowby estate, before he died a hero at Mafeking in—" Lady Darrowby Jones couldn't remember when Mafeking had hit the headlines of all the papers, getting it muddled with Kitchener in Khartoum. "What?" He should have said pardon instead, but Lady Darrowby Jones judged it not the best time to be correcting his manners. She repeated the information about the muddled brothers of Darrowby, then asked why the burglaries. "I didn't set out to kill anyone," he replied. "It was just the burglaries at first. I hated the Darrowby family so much because—" He couldn't bring forth that he was half Darrowby himself. "I wanted to frame them for the burglaries. I wanted you and your husband to suffer for not accepting me. I commissioned a series of house thefts across the area, thinking it would humiliate the Darrowbys to be caught with all that loot in their own grand house. I got everything delivered to the Dowager House, and then the next night I paid a couple of local crims I'd got to know during my job as a policeman to move the goods up here, after a share for the burglars and a few pieces for the removal boys." "Why move it?" Lady Alice asked. "Because I told my burglars that it was going out of the country, so it couldn't be traced back to them. They bought that hook, line and sinker, but it meant I had to move it on, cut the ties and all that. Listen, your knee is killing my back. Can you shift it a bit?" "Nice try, Cousin Whoosish." Alice would give no quarter, despite the family ties. "Why Matthew, then? I was fond of him." "It wasn't intended, not at all. It's just he came by one night when we were unloading some loot, and I could tell he rumbled everything straight away. I lashed out. He fell and hit his head on the mantelpiece and slumped to the floor. We picked him up and dumped him in the garden. He was still breathing then, honest to God he was. But not for much longer, as we all know." Their conversation had stopped right there, as Manners led a team of policemen into the ballroom, and Manners chose to read out the script himself. Since then, her nephew, Frank, had slipped the net 3 times and been caught again only twice. He was still at large, hence DCI Rude Manners putting a brave face on it. For all they knew, Whoosish might be attending the symposium right now, in some clever disguise. Perhaps he was sitting right next to his old boss, who was too absorbed in the latest slug news to notice the wanted man sitting by his side. But now was not the time for such fears. The symposium had been a success, the mystery solved, and it was about time for a pink gin. The Mystery of the American Slug. Chapter 1, Sneak Peek. Lady Darrowby-Jones ached for a pink gin. When she closed her eyes, she saw the heavy cut of the glasses Torino liked to serve it in. Yet, when she opened them again, there was no such glass within reach, just 1,000 people congratulating her on an excellent slug symposium. "All credit to my husband and Sir John Plumer," she would say, over and over again, as she steered her way towards the library. If Torino was absent, she would jolly well pour her own, however put out he would later be. It had been a long few days, but at least Darrowby was a happy man. She spotted him at that moment by the library door. Perhaps he had the same plan of action as she had, substituting a good malt for pink gin, but otherwise the same objective. He even had his left hand on the library door handle, while the right was exercised in continually pumping some inappropriately dressed individuals who looked loud, although the constant hum of people up and down the halls and corridors made it impossible to be sure whether their voices lived up to their looks. "Yes, Alfie, closing stages now. Soon be quiet again," she said on seeing Alfie Burrows, the private secretary she had gone to Oxford and brought back to work for her husband, cutting up slugs and noting down every little detail, and then organising the myriad of slugs on every horizontal surface in the east wing of Darrowby Hall. "I was hoping for a quiet word, Lady Darrowby-Jones." She looked at him, saw the worry on his face, knew what caused it. "Lord Darrowby-Jones spoke most highly of your work, just this very morning," she replied. "I was concerned that he might dispense with my services, as the symposium is coming to an end. Far from it, dear boy. Your temporary contract is to be made permanent, and I do believe there's a rise in the offing." "Well, that's delightful. Thank you, lady. You've earned it, my boy. Even more so with your extracurricular activities of recent days." That was a reference to the case just closed, which she called the Mystery of the Polite Man. She had solved the case, despite the efforts of DCI Rude Manners, but Alfie Burrows had played a strong supporting role. His name would be on the screen right below hers. Well, politeness dictated that her daughter, Lady Alice Darrowby-Jones, go before him, making him third in the credit listing. Frank Whoosish had been exposed as the wicked, jealous murderer of Paul Matthew Carter, a war hero just seeking a quiet life. She was convinced his death was an accident, but as long as Whoosish remained at large, slipping through the net of police custody, despite Lady Darrowby-Jones handing the man over on a platter, he would appear to all the world as a murderer, that would rank in people's minds even more than the fact that he was half Darrowby. Enough of past mysteries. Who knew what today would bring? Well, too many people lingering far too long and separating Lady Darrowby Jones from her pink gin. Be a dear, Alfie, and help me rid Lord Darrowby Jones of his hangers-on. They're preventing me from getting to my gin. Of course, Lady Darrowby Jones. It will be my pleasure. Only it wasn't as easy as he expected for one simple reason. The small knot of people surrounding Lord Darrowby Jones were Americans. Alfie tried valiantly for a moment, while Lady Darrowby Jones hung back, but it soon became apparent that the big guns were needed. "Excuse me, ladies and gents, but you're blocking my way to the gin decanter." That was an excellent opening shot, but the volley back was even better. "I don't mind if I do. Thanks, Lady Darrowby Jones. Which way to the decanter? I'm a Scotchman myself, but where there's gin in a gentleman's home, there will always be whiskey not too far away." "You better come in, then. Who are you, by the way?" Might as well be civil to the enemy, even if his twang was unbearable. "Al Hammerstein, ma'am." His hand shot out. "I'm not the Queen." She did not have the remotest possibility of royal blood in her veins, but didn't want to make the point too forcibly. Then she saw that she would have to explain if she kept up her antagonism, and the real objective wasn't this skirmish, but the capture of said gin decanter. "Professor Al Hammerstein of STINK, and this is my—" "What did you say? Stink? You're a professor of unpleasant smells?" "No, ma'am. It stands for the Science and Technology Institute of North Kakama. That's our college based in Kakama, Washington State, real close to Seattle. You've heard of Seattle, ain't ya?" Lady Darrowby Jones hadn't, but let it go. "More introductions, please," she said instead. "This here is my wife, Mrs. Hammerstein." Why did people introduce their wife with the obvious Mrs.? Lady Darrowby Jones wondered, as she held out her hand for the obligatory handshakes. Mrs. Hammerstein was clearly not American, heralding from either Liverpool or the Midlands. Those accents always confused her. The rest of Hammerstein's entourage consisted of two contrasting figures. Mr. Harrison B. Potters was loud and garish, wearing, of all things, a sports jacket over heavily creased flannels that gave him a sailor look. She wanted to reach out and turn down the volume knob every time he spoke, which was often, and without much consciousness of his surroundings. "I'm a PhD student," he said. "Subject is the love life of the common black slug." Lady Darrowby Jones felt able to switch off at that moment. At least Darrowby's slug talk steered clear of intimacy between Mr. and Mrs. Slug. The fourth person was much easier to accept, although her timidity made it tough to remember her. Miss Betty Bollinger had a sweet, shy smile, and it seemed that, behind the smile, lay more of the same. "Dear," Lord Darrowby Jones said, "these lovely people were just asking about staying to conduct some studies, and I was explaining that it's a bit of a tall order right now, with all the refurbishments planned for the next few months." "Quite, dear. Quite so." "Please hear us out, noble lord and lady," Hammerstein said, as the small party moved through the library door and into Torino's welcoming arms. Lady Darrowby Jones felt suddenly close to her objective. Certainly she collected a bunch of hangers-on, but that was life. Happened all the time. The American professor had a proposal. Armed with a chunky glass of malt, he let loose on the type of horse trading the Darrowby Joneses were not at all used to. "Sir and lady," he started, illustrating once again the average American's incredible inability to address aristocrats correctly. "I understand it's an awkward time, but we're keen as mustard to get stuck into the veritable slug city we have here." He spread his hands wide, as if the slugs were right there in the library, camping out on the bookshelves and sneaking glugs of gin and scotch. "I'm afraid it's—" "Wait, sir. Wait until you hear just how much we appreciate coming to stay a week or two. We've got in our possession something you might be mighty interested in." "What would that be, Hammerstein?" "Why, no more than a real rare version of the banana slug species." He turned to Lady Darrowby Jones and added in a quieter voice, "That's Areolimax columbianus, ma'am." Lady Darby-Jones found herself nodding in receipt of his words. "You don't mean the—" Lord Darby-Jones suddenly sat bolt upright in his seat. "Well, if you're thinking of the square-nosed banana slug, then I'm happy to report we do have one of those rare and beautiful slugs in our collection. Banana slugs are the predominant variety in our part of the world. The Olympic Forest Reserve was set up to help preserve many aspects of local fauna and flora. But the square-nosed cousin of the common banana slug is a real rare item." "Excellent, excellent. Can I see it? Do you have it with you, Hammerstein?" Darby was now out of his chair, moving from foot to foot like a small child in need of the little room. "We can send for it. I could call my department this very minute. The little beauty can travel by train to New York, first class, of course. From there it's only a matter of days to London. Say 2 weeks, door to door." He was getting ready for his knockout blow. "And that's all the time we need to stay here. Just 2 weeks, and we'll be out of your hair, Lord Darby." "You mean you would do that for me?" "For the King of the Slug Symposium? For sure." "I'm not sure," Lady Darby-Jones said into the following silence, not quite knowing whether she objected on principle or was negotiating on behalf of her husband. "You see, we can't hold up the refurbishment of the main house, and we're planning to go away to Scotland for a few months. After all, a slug was a slug. Who would sell their privacy for a sighting of some obscure variety?" Then the absolute knockout blow hit the room, with Professor Hammerstein saying there must be some confusion. The square-nosed banana slug was to be a gift, not a loan, to form the centrepiece of the Darby collection. That left Lady Darby-Jones isolated. Even Alfie would want to see this fine specimen, with its square nose and bulging eyes, or whatever features it boasted. "When would you like to arrive?" she asked. "There's no time like the present," Hammerstein replied. "How about we wrap things up at the Darby Arms and move our gear over in the morning?" This concludes The Mystery of the Polite Man by C.M. Rawlins, narrated by Sasha Higgins. Copyright 2023 by Clean Tales Publishing. This unabridged audiobook is published by arrangement with C.M. Rawlins and was produced in the year 2024 by Tantor Media Incorporated, a division of Recorded Books, which holds the copyright thereto. Please visit tantor.com for more information on our growing library of unabridged audiobooks.